Do you feel like you're wasting your life and your potential? Feel like life is just passing you by and you're stuck, totally frozen, without a clear goal or purpose? Today's story is going to show you a deep insight. Your biggest pain doesn't come from failing. It comes from not being yourself. You might be unhappy not because you're failing, but because you're actually succeeding at being someone you're not, and someone you don't even want to be. As you know, on this channel, we use stories to check out how timeless wisdom and philosophical knowledge, often backed up by the Psalms, gives us the tools to get over personal struggles and build a life purpose. In today's story, you'll see why that thing you love to do, or that hobby that lots of people think is useless, is actually the key to your full strength and to beating a bunch of problems in all different parts of your life. In this story, we're going to translate the old concept of the rejected stone into a practical, useful strategy. What you're going to see isn't about positive thinking. It's about getting the psychological truth that your rejected gift or goal, that gift you have or that favorite thing you do that makes time just disappear, isn't just a simple hobby. It's a compass. We're going to use Amelia's journey to help you stop focusing on what other people want so you can focus on your own hidden gift and life purpose. If this hits home, like and subscribe. Amelia's story starts now. There is an old profound text from the 139th Psalm that speaks of the human soul as being fearfully and wonderfully made. It suggests that our core identity is something intricate, intentional, and astonishing. It's a beautiful idea, this concept of an authentic self woven together in secret. But we have to ask, what happens when that authentic self is never claimed? What happens when it remains buried so deep that the person walking around in the world is just a collection of scripts, a costume that everyone, including the wearer, mistakes for the real thing? This isn't just a philosophical problem. For many of us, it's a quiet, daily emergency. We see this in Amelia. She isn't living a life. She is performing a role she never auditioned for. The polyester uniform itches. It's a constant low-grade irritation against her skin, a physical reminder that she is wearing a life that does not fit. Her world smells of stale coffee and frying oil at the Greasy Spoon diner. Her movements are efficient, practiced, and automatic. She refills cups, scribbles down orders, forces the small, tight smile that earns just enough in tips to pay the rent. But inside, her mind is screaming. This is the core of her pain. She is living a verdict, not a life. The life path her parents had written for her, Amelia is practical, not ambitious, became her reality after she dropped out of college, overwhelmed by a sense of being a total fraud. She is now trapped in her own proof. We see here how that prescribed path metastasizes. It becomes what Carl Jung called the persona. This is the mask we present to the world. It's a necessary social tool, but for Amelia, the mask has fused to the skin. She is no longer Amelia playing a waitress. She is the waitress. The script has consumed the actor. Her internal monologue is a loop of self-rejection. I am a fake. I am a waitress pretending to be a person. The exhaustion she feels at the end of her shift isn't just physical. It is the profound, soul-crushing fatigue that comes from spending every waking moment suppressing who you are, in favor of who you were told you had to be. This state of being, this acceptance of a false self, is what Søren Kierkegaard identified as the most dangerous form of despair. It's not the dramatic despair of loss. It's the quiet, numb despair of not choosing to be oneself. She is living, in his terms, in sickness unto death, because the part of her that is truly alive, the wonderfully made self from that old text, is being suffocated. She is stagnant, not because she serves coffee, but because she has accepted that serving coffee is the total definition of her existence. This is her primary chaos, the personal, internal rot. But it has a partner. The prison doesn't just exist at work. It waits for her at home. She pushes open the apartment door, carrying the ache of her inauthenticity with her. She is desperate for a moment of relief, a place where the mask can come off. The apartment, however, is not a refuge. It is the second half of her cage. This is where her twin suffocations reveal themselves. The professional pain is amplified by the interpersonal pain. Her companion, Owen, is on the sofa. He is physically present, but emotionally absent. The room is dark, save for the cold, blue light illuminating his face from his phone. He inhabits that digital space, not the physical one. His world is the one in his hand, not the one in the room with him. She tries. The attempt is small, a quiet bid for connection. "Hey, rough day." A sound escapes him. It is not a word. It is the acknowledgement of a minor disturbance, like a fly buzzing near his ear. His thumb never stops its rhythmic, clicking scroll. This is the confirmation. At the diner, she is invisible to her customers, a function rather than a person. Here, in her own home, she is invisible to the one person who is supposed to see her. The silence in the apartment isn't peace. It is the sound of her irrelevance. It is the final, crushing validation of the story she was told about herself, that she isn't even interesting enough to look up for. This is the nature of the trap. It's a perfect self-sustaining ecosystem of pain. The borrowed identity from her family whispers that she is a fraud. The man on the sofa confirms that feeling of worthlessness. Her internal ache is validated by her external reality. She is locked in a prison where the two jailers, her work and her home, share the keys. She is smothered by the predictable, soul-killing routine of her job, and she is starved of the emotional connection that might give her the strength to escape it. How can a person even begin to find themselves when they are trapped, both at work and in their own living room? She tries again later in the evening. The silence of the apartment is heavy, broken only by the muted, tinny sounds of videos from Owen's phone. She had a small, strange interaction at the diner. A customer, a tired-looking woman, left her a $20 tip on a $3 coffee bill, with a note that just said, "You have a kind face." It was a flicker of acknowledgement. It was proof she was, at least, visible. She wants to share this tiny spark, this moment of being seen, perhaps as a way to remind herself, and him, that she exists outside the diner uniform. "Owen," she starts, her voice sounding too loud in the manufactured quiet. The strangest thing happened at work. His hand comes up from the sofa, a single index finger raised in the universal gesture for wait. "Hold on one sec," he mutters. His eyes, pale in the blue glow, never leave the bright rectangle in his hand. The 1 second stretches. It expands. It fills the room, becoming a minute, then 2, then 5. The silence congeals, becoming heavy and solid. The silence becomes the answer. The 1 sec was never a request for time. It was a dismissal. He has forgotten she even spoke. The tiny spark from the diner, the kind face, is not just extinguished. It's doused in icy water. This is where the internal collapse happens. This is where the internal collapse happens. It's a physiological response, not just a feeling. She feels a hot, prickling shame crawl up the back of her neck. Her stomach tightens into a cold knot. The internal monologue is immediate and brutal. He didn't even look up. I'm not even worth a pause. I'm not as interesting as a random video, a stranger's post. I am invisible. The $20 tip feels like a joke now, a mistake. The real verdict on her value is here, on this sofa, in this silence. The story her family wrote about her being practical feels true because she is being practically ignored. There is a desperate, recurring question in the 42nd Psalm. Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me? This isn't just ancient poetry. It's a precise psychological diagnosis. It is the sound of the conscious self talking to its own core of pain. This is the voice Amelia is hearing. Her soul, her authentic self, is cast down, not because of some grand cinematic tragedy, but because of 1,000 daily paper cuts of indifference. That sense of worthlessness isn't a pre-existing condition. It is a consequence. It is the logical conclusion she has been forced to draw from the evidence presented to her by her primary relationship. The French philosopher Simone Weil had a specific term for this: malheur, or affliction. It's a state of being that is deeper than simple suffering. It's the kind of pain, inflicted from the outside, that imprints itself onto your soul and begins to convince you that you are worthless. It is a form of dehumanization. Owen's glowing screen is not just a distraction, it is an active participant in her affliction. It is a cold, blue mirror that reflects back to her what she has been taught to believe her value is: 0. His digital preoccupation is the daily food that nourishes her internal critic, proving its worst accusations true every single night. The psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic thought, built his entire framework on the human biological need for what he called unconditional positive regard. It is not a luxury, it is a fundamental requirement, like oxygen or water. We need to be seen. We need to be valued simply for existing, not for what we do or provide. When we are starved of it, especially in the one place we are supposed to be safe, our own homes, we begin to wither. Amelia is starving. She is living in a state of profound emotional malnutrition. His inattention is not neutral. It is a form of psychological neglect. We have to understand this dynamic. This is the anatomy of her pain. It is not that he is mean in an active, aggressive way. It's worse. It's that she, his companion, does not even register. His "hold on one sec" is an indefinite sentence to irrelevance. A screaming argument, at least, would be a form of connection. It would be an acknowledgement that she matters enough to fight with. But this is nothing. This is the final devastating confirmation of her deepest fear, the one planted by her family and watered by the diner, that she is, in fact, nothing at all. This is the terrible genius of her twin suffocations. The borrowed identity from her family whispers that she is a fraud. The man on the sofa, with his digital absence, confirms that feeling of worthlessness. The internal problem and the external problem are in perfect toxic agreement. The turmoil within her is the desperate, unheard scream of a self that knows it was wonderfully made, as the old text says, but is being treated as disposable. It is the friction between her buried potential and her daily reality. And this leads to the central, terrifying question of her trap. When the person who sleeps next to you, the one person who is supposed to be your anchor in the world, treats you as invisible, how can you possibly avoid believing it yourself? The dual chaos is a pincer movement, a two-front war on the self. The external world, the one she navigates with a coffee pot, confirms her lack of value. The internal world, the one she shares with her companion, confirms her lack of visibility. But these two forces, as powerful as they are only the symptoms. They are the prison walls. They are not, however, the blueprints. To find the architect, we have to look deeper, into the origin story, into the very foundation of this cell. This is the third layer of her pain, the source code. It arrives, as it so often does, not with a bang, but with a simple, familiar ringtone. It's her mother. The call comes on her day off, a rare pocket of stillness. She answers, and the voice on the other end is warm, familiar, and unintentionally suffocating. It's a normal check-in. They talk about the weather, an aunt's health, and then the line is delivered. The kill shot, wrapped in affection. "It's just so good you have that stable job at the diner, Amelia. We always said you were our practical one, not a head-in-the-clouds dreamer." It is said with love. It is said with pride. And for Amelia, it is a nail in the coffin. She agrees, her voice a perfect mimicry of a content daughter. "Yeah, Mum, it's good, it's stable." But as she hangs up, a bitter metallic taste floods her mouth. It is the taste of resentment. This is not a new feeling. It is a ghost that lives in her ribs. The phone call is a time machine. It doesn't just remind her of the present. It yanks her back to the past. She is suddenly, vividly back in the dorm room she abandoned the moment she dropped out of college. Everyone saw it as proof that the story they wrote for her was true. See, she's practical. That ambitious college stuff wasn't for her. But in her memory, she sees a terrified, overwhelmed young woman, drowning in a sense of being a fraud who just needed help, not a label. The problem is that the label, practical, became a prophecy. It became her entire identity. She is now living in a loop of that one past failure, that one past trauma of inadequacy, and her family, in their love, keeps her chained to it. Every "aren't you glad you're stable" is another link. This is the poison of resentment, the term Friedrich Nietzsche used for it. It is not clean, hot anger. That, at least, is an action. No, this is the cold, stale, bitter anger of the powerless. It is the resentment of the person who cannot fight back against the script they've been handed, so they are forced to simply live it and hate themselves for it. There is a line in the 18th Psalm that is a psychological cry for freedom. It says, "He brought me out into a spacious place." This is a fundamental human need. The soul requires room to move. It needs a spacious place to become what it was meant to be. But Amelia's mother, with her loving words, walls her back in. She is not in a spacious place. She is in a tiny, cramped box labeled practical, and the lid is nailed shut. The resentment she feels is the sound of her authentic self, her potential self, clawing at the wooden lid, suffocating in the dark. The psychologist Alice Miller wrote about this, the drama of the gifted child, or in this case, the drama of the compliant child. This is the tragic bargain. As a child, Amelia learned that to receive love and approval, she had to be the practical one. She had to abandon the dreamer parts of herself. She traded her authenticity for her family's approval. Now, as an adult, she is living that trade. The phone call is a bill arriving in the mail, a reminder of the terrible binding contract she signed in childhood. She is paying for their approval with her own life. This is the source code of her trap. The job at the diner is just the physical manifestation of the practical label. Her feeling of being a fraud, the one that started in college, is the daily reality of living a life that is not hers. And her relationship with Owen, the digital ghost, is the logical outcome. How can she demand to be seen by him when her own family has never seen her, only the role they cast her in? How can she escape the prison when the architects of that prison, the people she loves most, keep lovingly reinforcing the walls, telling her how safe and stable it is inside? It is a small, quiet evening, no different from the last. But tonight, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark ignites in Amelia. It comes from the what if. What if the story her parents wrote is wrong? What if the feeling she gets when she secretly reads those articles about cognitive development, about the mechanics of learning, isn't a delusion? She has spent years hiding this part of herself, this fascination with how a mind learns, treating it like a shameful secret. It is the one part of her that feels authentic. Tonight, in a rare, fragile burst of courage, she decides to risk sharing 1% of it. She turns to Owen, who is lost in the blue light of his phone. "You know," she says, her voice cautious, "I was reading this really interesting thing about how kids learn about dyslexia." Owen looks up. This in itself is a small shock. He seems momentarily confused, as if she has just started speaking a foreign language. He processes her words, and then he laughs. It is not a cruel laugh. It is worse. It is a soft, amused, pitying laugh. "Teaching?" he says, the word hanging in the air. "Amelia, come on. You need a degree for that, don't you? It's not a cute hobby?" The words land with perfect, devastating precision. A cute hobby. He has, in one sentence, confirmed every accusation her internal critic has ever leveled against her. He has validated the script her family wrote. She is practical, and this interest is just a head-in-the-clouds fantasy. The spark is gone instantly. In its place, a familiar, cold dread. Her internal monologue is immediate, and it sides with him. He's right. Of course he's right. It's ridiculous. Who am I? A dropout? A waitress? Who am I to think about teaching? It's a joke. The shame is overwhelming. This is the activation of her deepest paralysis. It is not just a fear of failure. It is a profound, bone-deep terror of the unknown. And in that moment, she makes a choice. The known, predictable, aching misery of the diner is safer. The pain of the diner is a pain she knows how to manage. This new pain, the sharp, bright pain of being ridiculed for her one true interest, is unbearable. She chooses the familiar prison. We have to understand what is happening here. In this moment of psychological retreat, the great Stoic philosopher Epicteto taught that we are not disturbed by events, but by the judgments we make about those events. Amelia is not suffering from the act of failure. She is suffering immensely from the imagination of it. She is living in a state of preemptive catastrophe. In her mind, she has already pictured herself trying and failing, being humiliated, and hearing the chorus of "I told you so's" from her family, from Owen. His cute hobby comment simply gave voice to the very disasters she was already picturing. He confirmed her imaginary fears as a fact. This is the shadow. There is a line in the 23rd Psalm, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow." We often misread this as the valley of death. But the text is precise. It says the valley of the shadow. The shadow is not the thing itself. The danger is not the change, it is the fear of the change. Amelia is paralyzed at the very entrance to the valley, terrified of a phantasm, a non-existent catastrophe, and this terror is contagious. We must see that Owen is afraid too. He is not afraid for her. He is terrified of what her change would mean for him. His ridicule is not just a casual comment. It is an act of self-preservation. It is an anchor thrown to keep her exactly where she is, because her stagnation guarantees his own. This is the prison of the known. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti spoke of this endlessly. He said the mind will always cling to the known, even if the known is a prison, because it is pathologically terrified of the unknown. Her diner job and her empty, silent relationship are her known prison. His belittling remark is the sound of the jailer checking the lock, and her agreeing with him, he's right, is the sound of her accepting once again her incarceration. It is safer to be numb in the cell you know than to be terrified in the freedom you don't. This is why she retreats. The known pain is preferable to the unknown. Their routine is not peace. It is not stability, it is an armistice. It is a silent truce they have both signed, a pact based on a mutual unspoken terror of disturbing the fragile, dead quiet of their lives. They are both anesthetized by the predictability of it all, preferring the dull numbness of the known to the sharp, terrifying and fully alive possibility of the unknown. And this leads us to the real, frightening question. They are so deep in this shared paralysis, so codependent on each other's fear, so terrified of the shadow in the valley. Perhaps they don't even want to be saved. It is Friday night, the peak of the restaurant's chaotic rhythm. The air is thick with the smell of old grease and burnt coffee, an aroma that clings to her clothes and sinks into her skin. She feels it in her pores, a physical layer of her stagnation. This shift was no different from the one before, or the one before that. A blur of refilling cups, forcing smiles, and clearing plates left by people who looked through her. She is a function, a ghost in an apron. The drive home is a blur of automatic turns. Her mind not empty but numb, a low-grade hum of exhaustion. There is a deep, primal need welling up in her chest. Not for joy, not for excitement, just for contact, for a single moment of human quiet, a sign that she is more than the task she performs. She pushes the apartment door open, and it happens, the moment that breaks her. It is not a new event. It is the absence of a new event. It is the crushing, absolute, terrifying sameness. Owen is on the sofa, exactly as he was on Monday, exactly as he will be on Sunday. He is a fixture. The room is dark, save for the flickering blue light that dances across his face. He is scrolling. The sight of it, the repetition of it, hits her with the force of a physical blow. It is the horrifying realization that nothing will ever change. Her life is a closed loop, a bug in the code, repeating the same meaningless line forever. The philosopher Albert Camus spoke of the absurd by using the myth of Sisyphus, the man condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down for eternity. We often think the tragedy is the effort, but Camus said the tragedy is the consciousness. It is the moment Sisyphus watches the rock roll down, knowing he must do it again. This is what Amelia feels. The diner is her hill. The exhaustion is her boulder. And this apartment, this man on the sofa, is the rock rolling back to the bottom. She is in this instant fully conscious of her own futility. She doesn't cry. Crying would require feeling. She doesn't yell. Yelling would require energy, a belief that something could be altered by the noise. She feels nothing. A vast, cold, terrifying vacuum has opened up inside her. The rage from the phone call with her mother is gone. The prickling shame from her cute hobby comment is gone. All of it has been burned away, leaving only this sterile, silent grey ash. Apathy. This, we are told, is the true bottom of the well. Not the pain, but the cessation of it. The point where the soul simply gives up. She walks past him. He doesn't look up. He doesn't register her presence. She is a ghost in her own home, haunting rooms that are no longer hers. She goes to the bedroom and closes the door, but the darkness in the room is no different from the darkness inside her. She sits on the edge of the bed, not even bothering to turn on a light. The great psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the concentration camps, identified this state precisely. He called it the existential vacuum. It is the total loss of logos, the Greek word for meaning. It is the moment the why of existence disappears. Without a why, the how becomes impossible. Why get up? Why go to the diner? Why try to speak? Why endure? Her life, stripped of any illusion of purpose, is laid bare. It is a machine that serves no function. It is a script that has no plot. It is just this. The smell of grease and the blue light of a phone. The question that rises in her mind is not angry. It is hollow. Is this it? Is this all? There is no answer. And in the silence, she realizes she no longer expects one. This is the soul's checkmate. It is the place described in the bleakest of all the Psalms, the 88th one. It is a text unique in its despair. It does not end with a glimmer of hope or a promise of rescue. It ends with a single devastating line. Darkness is my closest companion. This is where Amelia is now. She is not in the valley of the shadow. She is in the pit. Her companion is not the man on the sofa. Her companion is the crushing, absolute darkness of her own meaninglessness. This is the consequence. This is the inevitable endpoint of a life built on a borrowed identity and starved of all connection. This is not a dramatic Hollywood collapse. It is a silent implosion. It is the cold, quiet realization that nothing matters, that her job is a joke, her home is an empty room, and she, herself, is a fraud who has finally been found out, only to discover that no one, not even her jailers, was paying attention. The old foundation, the script her family gave her, has crumbled to dust, revealing that there was nothing underneath. She is at point zero. And so the final, universal question hangs in the void. When you are truly at the bottom, when the darkness is your only companion, where exactly does the help come from? It is very late. Hours past the moment of her silent collapse. The apartment is a tomb of stale shared air. The only sound for the last hour has been the rhythmic, almost hypnotic click, click, click of Owen's thumb on his phone. But now, even that stops. The blue light that has been painting the living room wall finally goes dark. He is asleep. The silence changes. It is no longer an empty, shared silence. It is now, finally, hers. She waits. She listens to the sound of his breathing, ensuring he is truly gone from the waking world. Only then, with the caution of a thief in her own home, does she move. She retrieves her old scarred laptop. It whirs to life loud in the stillness, and she winces, pausing again. The screen illuminates her face, but this light is different from the cold blue of the phone. It is a warm, inviting glow. She opens a folder, one buried several layers deep, one with a name so mundane, admin or misc, that no one would ever think to look inside. But this folder is her only sanctuary. It is her real life. It contains gigabytes of academic articles on cognitive development. It holds carefully constructed lesson plans for teaching fractions using building blocks. It is full of diagrams she has drawn herself, explaining the architecture of how a young mind connects to an idea. Here in the glow of this screen, she is not a waitress, she is not a fraud, she is not the practical one. She is an architect, she is a student, she is a teacher. As she reads a new paper on methods for teaching history through storytelling, the numbness from a few hours ago recedes. The exhaustion from the diner disappears. Her face, usually tight with a practiced empty smile, softens. Her brow furrows, not with worry, but with intense, focused concentration. This is what the psychologists call flow. It is the state of being so immersed in an activity that the self disappears. But for her, it is the opposite. It is the only time her self appears. Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, offered a simple instruction. Follow your bliss. He taught that the thing that captivates you, the thing you do where time disappears, is not a hobby. It is a compass. It is your soul pointing the way home. This folder, this secret, useless interest, this is Amelia's bliss. This is her dharma, the Sanskrit word for one's true path or duty. It is the work she was meant to do. But she has been taught by her family and by her partner that this compass is broken, that it points toward a ridiculous, childish fantasy. She has been convinced that her true north is a delusion. And so this bliss is also her great shame. Owen stirs on the sofa, a deep sigh in his sleep. Her reaction is instantaneous and violent. She snaps the laptop shut, the click of the lid sounding like a gunshot in the quiet. Her heart hammers. She is flooded with adrenaline, the same panic she would feel if she had been caught committing a crime. She is terrified, not that he will be angry, but that he will see her, that he will see this secret, authentic part of her, and confirm once again what he told her before, that it is just a cute hobby, that she is ridiculous. This is the core of her prison. The one thing that makes her feel truly alive is the one thing she must hide for fear of ridicule. This is the stone which the builders rejected, the line from the 118th Psalm. The builders of her life, her family, her partner, have looked at this brilliant foundational part of her being and declared it worthless. And she, in her desperation for their approval, has believed them. She has joined them. She, too, has rejected her own cornerstone, casting it aside as useless rubble. She hides her own potential, convinced that her shame is proof of its worthlessness. We can see the contrast so clearly. There is an ancient text, the very first psalm, that describes two paths. One is the path of the chaff, the dry, weightless husks that the wind drives away. This is her life at the diner, her life with Owen. It is meaningless, aimless, and dry. But the other path is that of the tree planted by the rivers of water, a thing that is rooted, alive, nourished, and fruitful. This folder, this secret late-night study, this is her river. It is the only thing nourishing her soul, and yet she is dying of thirst because she is convinced that this water is poison. The central question of her life is now laid bare. Why is the one thing that makes her feel real, the one thing that is truly hers, the only thing she is convinced she must hide? At the same time, miles away in a different world, an old man sits on a park bench. His name is Harrison. The air here is clean, smelling of cut grass and damp earth. He is watching a scene unfold, a small universal drama. A mother and her young son are locked in a familiar battle over a math workbook. The child is dissolving into tears of frustration, his small voice rising as he insists, "I can't. It's too hard." The mother, stretched thin by a long day, is vibrating with her own exasperation. "Just focus, you're not even trying." Her anger is a shield for her own fear, a fear that her child is falling behind. Harrison just watches. He does not interfere, he does not judge. His face, lined with the kind of maps that only time and experience can draw, is calm, patient, and deeply attentive. This is a man who radiates a stillness that is almost a physical force. It is the polar opposite of Amelia's internal buzzing chaos, and the opposite of her companion's checked-out digital haze. Harrison's stillness is not apathy. It is a profound, engaged presence. He is a retired school principal, a man who spent 40 years in the trenches of the human condition, and he has learned the difference between an event and the meaning of an event. This is what it looks like when a person is fully aligned, when the inner self and the outer life are not at war. His work did not stop when he collected his last paycheck. His purpose, his core function, was never principle. It was understanding, it was seeing. He embodies a life lived with intention, not by default. He operates from a place of such deep, settled peace that he has no need to interfere, no ego-driven impulse to rush in and fix the mother and child. He is practicing what the Taoist sage Lao Tzu called Wu Wei, effortless action, or action from a place of non-striving. He knows that the solution is not to force, but to be. This is the peace that comes from a lifetime of knowing and trusting one's own path. He is the figure the philosopher Plato dreamed of, the sage who has left the cave. He is not fooled by the shadows on the wall, the surface-level argument about division and fractions. He sees the true form of the problem. He sees the child's terror of inadequacy. He sees the mother's fear of failure. He sees the breakdown of connection, the very thing Amelia is starving for. He sees the potential in the child, where the mother currently sees only a problem. His entire worldview is built on this. This was the axis of his career, his guiding principle. Harrison was a man who spent his life looking for the things everyone else threw away. He was drawn to the difficult kids, the ones the system labeled as slow or disruptive. He saw these children not as problems to be managed, but as puzzles to be understood. He had a radical, counterintuitive philosophy, one he had borrowed from an ancient text, a line from the 118th Psalm. This was his secret. He believed with an almost religious conviction that the stone which the builders rejected always becomes the most important cornerstone. His entire life was a treasure hunt for discarded stones. He looked at the angry child and saw a leader. He looked at the quiet child and saw a poet. He looked at the slow child and saw a mind that simply moved on a different track. This is the wisdom he embodies sitting on this park bench. He is not just a retired man. He is a master of seeing value where the world sees only waste. He is a living testament to the idea that purpose is not a job title, but a state of being. We have then these two poles. Amelia, a young woman defined by her rejection, by her family, by her partner, and ultimately by herself. She is a storm of internal chaos, a life lived entirely by default, convinced of her own worthlessness. And then there is this man, Harrison, a center of gravity, a life defined by embracing the rejected. He is a man who has built an entire existence on the profound, unshakable belief that the thing the world calls useless is, in fact, the very key to the whole structure. This is the contrast that will define the collision. She is the rejected stone, convinced she is rubble, a fraud waiting to be found out. He is the builder, the one man on earth who has trained his eye to see her true, foundational value. She is spinning in a vortex of what if I fail and what if they're right. He is sitting in the calm, quiet, central knowledge of what is. What does this old man, watching a child cry over homework, know about the universe that she, trapped in the greasy air of the diner, has so completely and tragically missed? She is in the park, but she is not at the park. She is just a body occupying a space on a bench, a void wrapped in skin, still hollowed out from the realization of her own complete meaninglessness. She is in the grey, silent aftermath of her collapse. She is not reading, she is not listening to music, she is just existing. A ghost on a bench. Then a sound penetrates the fog. It is not a bird or traffic. It is a child's voice, rising in that specific panicked pitch of absolute frustration. I can't, I hate it, I'm stupid. The words are a slap. They are so sharp, so familiar. It is the same voice that lives inside her own head. Her apathy, for the first time in days, has a breach. She looks and she sees the scene Harrison was observing. A mother and a son, locked in the miserable, unwinnable war of homework. The mother is frantic. The child is in a full-blown crisis, his small fists clenched. Amelia's body moves before her mind gives permission. The script in her head, the one that tells her she is a fraud, a waitress, an imposter, is momentarily drowned out by a deeper, more primal instinct. It is the instinct of the healer moving toward the wound. It is the architect, seeing a problem she instinctively knows how to solve. She approaches, not as an authority, but as an ally. She ignores the mother, whose face is a mask of anger and embarrassment. She kneels, putting her eyes level with the child's. He is red-faced, tears streaming. Math is the absolute worst, isn't it? She says, her voice quiet. The boy freezes, his cry catching in his throat. He stares at this stranger who is not yelling at him. He nods, sniffing. I hate it. She nods back. Me too. It feels like your brain is full of angry bees. The boy gives a small, watery laugh. A connection. A tiny, fragile bridge has been built across the chaos. In that moment, she is not the practical one. She is not the waitress. She is not the failure. She is, for these few minutes, fully and completely herself. The knowledge from that secret folder on her laptop comes rushing in, not as academic theory, but as fluid, natural action. The problem isn't the numbers, she says to him. It's the paper. It's boring. She ignores the workbook. She picks up a handful of small twigs and a few pebbles. Forget the bees. Let's make this about pirates. We have 3 pirates, see? She says, laying down 3 twigs. And they just found 12 pieces of gold. She arranges the pebbles. In 5 minutes, the child is not just calm. He is engaged. He is dividing the treasure. He has the answer. The mother is staring, speechless, her anger replaced by a stunned gratitude. She pays Amelia, who instinctively tries to refuse, feeling that old script shame rush back in. "It was nothing," she murmurs, already retreating, becoming the waitress again. The mother and child walk away, and Amelia is left standing, trembling slightly from the sudden exposure, the adrenaline of being seen in her secret skill. That is when the old man, Harrison, approaches. He wasn't interfering. He was simply observing. He walks up to her, his gaze not appraising, but steady. He says very simply, "You have a gift." There is a line in the 119th Psalm, a request, "Open my eyes that I may see wonderful things." We think of this as a plea for a miracle, for the heavens to part. But the real miracle, the most profound, wonderful thing, is to see what is already there, to see the truth. This is what the Socratic philosophers called maiutics, the art of the midwife. Socrates believed a true teacher does not give a student the truth. He does not pour information into an empty vessel. Instead, he acts as a midwife, asking the precise questions that help the student give birth to the truth they already possess inside them. This is what Harrison just did. His observation, "You have a gift," was not a compliment. It was not praise. It was a Socratic instrument. It was a piece of mirror held up to her. It was the first external validation of her authentic self, the one she keeps hidden like a crime. In the Zen tradition, this is a kensho. It is not a full, final enlightenment, but a glimpse, a sudden, shocking, momentary crack in the false wall of the ego, a brief, blinding flash of reality through the fog of her conditioned, borrowed identity. This is the collision. The person trapped in the cave, who believes the shadows are the only reality, has just been touched on the shoulder by someone who has been outside, in the sun. She, who is defined by her belief that she is a fraud. He, who is defined by his ability to see true value. Her entire world, her entire system of belief, is built on the fact that she is not a teacher, that she is not gifted, that she is only a waitress. His 5 simple words have just taken a hammer to the entire foundation of that prison. And so the real question begins. Why did that simple, quiet sentence from a total stranger terrify her and thrill her more than any pronouncement her family has ever made? The next day she is back at the diner, and the world is painfully loud. The clatter of plates, the hiss of the coffee machine, the sharp, impatient ring of the order bell. It is the same soundtrack of her life, the same chorus of her stagnation. But today, something is fundamentally different. Her body is on autopilot, pouring coffee, delivering toast, but her mind is not there. Her mind is in the park. It is replaying, in a non-stop, obsessive loop, the 5 words the old man said, "You have a gift." That sentence has lodged itself in her mind like a splinter, a piece of foreign material that the rest of her psyche is desperately trying to eject, but cannot. The words echo. You have a gift. They play over the sound of the order bell. A gift. They stand in stark, violent contrast to the life she is currently living. They are a direct contradiction to the script her family wrote for her, the one that labeled her practical and not ambitious. They are the absolute antithesis of her companion's dismissive, pitying laugh and his label, a cute hobby. For her entire adult life, every piece of external evidence has confirmed her deepest, most secret fear, that she is a fraud, a failure, a person of no real substance. And then, one stranger, in 1 minute, presented a piece of counter-evidence so powerful it has threatened to bring the whole, fragile structure of her identity crashing down. This is what the philosophers call dissonance. It is the unbearable psychological tension of trying to hold 2 completely opposing ideas in your mind at the same time. Idea 1, her lifelong belief. I am a worthless, practical waitress who failed at college. Idea 2, the old man's words, I have a gift. They cannot both be true. Her mind is now a battlefield. The old, familiar, comfortable pain of her worthlessness is at war with the new, terrifying, and exhilarating pain of her potential. The old story, the one that defined her, now has a virus in its code. Plato described this perfectly. In his allegory, people are chained in a cave staring at a wall. They believe the shadows dancing on that wall are the entire world. They have never known anything else. Then one person is unchained and dragged outside into the sun. They are blinded. They see for the first time the real world. That old man, with his 5 words, was dragging Amelia out of the cave. He showed her a glimpse of the sun, a version of herself she never believed could exist. And now, back in the cave of the diner, the shadows on the wall, the orders, the uniform, the smell of grease, no longer look real. They look like what they are. Pale, flickering imitations of a life. She can no longer accept the shadows. The dissonance is becoming unbearable. It is changing from a splinter to a burning thirst. There is a line in the 63rd Psalm, "My soul thirsts for you, in a dry and weary land where there is no water." This describes her new state perfectly. She is no longer just empty as she was in her collapse. Emptiness is passive. This is active. She is now thirsty. She is thirsty for the truth of what he said. She is thirsty for the peace he seemed to possess, a peace that was so solid it felt like an object. She is thirsty for the meaning that he saw in her, a meaning she has never been able to see in herself. The shift ends. She hangs up her apron, the familiar costume of her old self, but she does not go home back to the silent man and the blue light of the phone. The thought of that apartment, of that specific soul-killing silence, is now more terrifying than the unknown. The dissonance has forced a choice. She must resolve the two warring ideas. She must know if that old man was real, or a hallucination. She must know if what she felt in the park, that surge of purpose, was real, or just a new, more sophisticated form of delusion. She finds herself walking, her steps quick and decisive, her heart pounding not with fear but with a strange, new, demanding energy. She is walking back to the park. The old, familiar internal critic is still there, screaming at her. "Who do you think you are? You're going to hunt down an old man? What are you going to say? You're a fool. You're a waitress." But for the first time in her life, another voice is present. It is not even a voice. It is a thirst. It is a need. It is the non-negotiable demand of her own soul, the one that has been buried and rejected, finally crying out for water in a dry and weary land. This time, she wasn't looking for an escape. She was looking for a teacher. But what if he was gone? She walks. Her feet feel heavy, pulling toward the familiar, safe misery of her apartment. But that strange, demanding thirst from the day before is stronger. It is a thin, hot wire in her chest, pulling her forward, toward the park. Her internal critic, the voice of her lifelong script, is screaming, "This is insane. You look like a stalker. What are you going to say to a random old man? He'll think you're a creep. He'll laugh. Turn around. Go home. Go home. Go home." The voice is loud, logical, and terrified. It is the sound of her prison, sensing an escape. It is the sound of the chains rattling. And there he is, on the same bench, as if he never left, as if he were waiting. He is just sitting, radiating that same impossible, infuriating calm. She stops, 10 yards away. This is the moment. This is the threshold. Everything in her screams danger. To be seen is to be judged. To be judged is to be found fraudulent. To be found fraudulent is to be annihilated. This is the logic that has governed her entire life. It is safer to remain invisible, in the diner, in her apartment. She can right now turn around. She can go home to Owen, who will not even notice she was late. She can go back to the known pain. But she doesn't. She is tired. She is not just tired from her life, she is tired of it. The exhaustion of her inauthenticity is, in this one, single, instant, greater than her fear of being seen. She takes a breath. It feels like the first one she has taken in a decade. Her feet move. She crosses the grass. He looks up, his eyes clear, no surprise in them, just waiting. She stands before him, feeling like a child, exposed, stupid, and raw. Her mouth is dry, and the words that come out are not what she planned. They are not a question, they are a confession. "Hi," she stammers, the word catching in her throat. Yesterday." He just waits, giving her the space to find her words. She can't. So the truth, the core of her shame, comes spilling out. "Ah, you said I had a gift. You don't understand." Her voice drops. I'm a waitress." She says the word like it's a disease. "I didn't even finish college. I dropped out. I'm not..." She can't finish the sentence. "I am not what you think I am. I am a fraud." This is her, holding up her entire borrowed identity, her badge of failure, as proof that his observation must be wrong. The great Socratic revolution in thought was built on one simple, earth-shattering idea. True wisdom begins with the admission of one's own ignorance. This is the moment. Amelia, by confessing her failure, is, for the first time, admitting that her entire life script, the one that insists she is only a waitress, might not be the absolute truth. She is, in her shame, accidentally practicing the first virtue of the philosopher. She is finally vulnerably saying, "I don't know." She's admitting that the old familiar story in her head is no longer sufficient to explain her world. This is the real act of courage. Courage is not, as we are often told, the absence of fear. Courage is not fighting. It is not resistance. True courage is the willingness to be this vulnerable. It is the act of lowering the shield, of exposing the soft, uncertain self underneath, and asking for help. This is the moment in all the great myths, the one Joseph Campbell identified as the acceptance of the call. The hero, after refusing and refusing, finally accepts that they are lost. They stop running from the call to adventure, and instead they turn and they seek the guide. This is not a social call. This is a spiritual emergency. In the 25th Psalm there is a line that is the seeker's prayer: "Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths." This is what she is doing, in her own secular, terrified way. She is standing before the only person she has ever met who seems to know a different path, and she is admitting she is lost. The confession of her shame is her request for a map. And so, after the confession, after the poison is drawn, she is finally able to ask the question that has been consuming her, the one that pulled her here. "What did you mean? Yesterday, when you said, what did you mean about the stone?" Harrison does not smile. He just looks at her, a deep, assessing gaze that does not feel like judgment but like appraisal. He sees her confession. "I'm a waitress," for exactly what it is. It is her shield. It is her proof of worthlessness. It is the wall she is hiding behind, and she is pointing to it desperately to prove that he must be wrong about her. He lets the silence sit. He lets her feel the weight of her own vulnerability, the way her entire identity is balanced on that one single self-loathing word. He nods very slowly. "You're right," he says, and the words confuse her. "You are a waitress. That is what you do. It is not who you are. You have confused your function with your identity. And you are by far not the only one, the only—" "You asked about the stone," he says, his voice quiet, matter-of-fact. It's an old line from the 118th Psalm. The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Amelia visibly tenses, a cold wave of disappointment washing over her. She braces for a religious sermon. She feels instantly foolish, like she just walked into a conversion trap, asking a stranger for wisdom and getting a Bible verse. Harrison sees this shift in her eyes immediately. He holds up a hand. "Wait. Don't do that. Don't tune out. This has nothing to do with religion. It is a perfect psychological blueprint. It's not about a God in the sky. It's about value. It's about how we, as humans, decide what is valuable and what is useless." "The poem is about builders," he continues, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping, becoming more intense. "Who are the builders? They are the system. They are the people who decide what a real job is, a real education, a real life. They are the ones who hand out the labels." He taps his temple. "Often they are the ones closest to us, our families, the people who love us the most. They give us a script, a story about ourselves to keep us safe. You are the practical one. You are the smart one. You are not the ambitious one. They build a neat, safe little box for us, and they tell us it is a home. But the problem," Harrison says, "is that every person is born with something that doesn't fit in that box. A passion, a gift, as I called it. Your connection with that child, the way you think." He gestures back to the spot where the scene happened. The builders look at that gift and it scares them. It's not on their blueprint. It doesn't have a diploma. It doesn't have a salary. It's not practical. So they reject it. They call it rubble. They call it a cute hobby. They toss it aside. And the greatest tragedy of all is that we, in our desperation to be loved by the builders, we believe them. We join them. We learn to reject our own gift. This is it. This is the moment the pattern is revealed. This is the click that is not a relief but a sickening cold wave of recognition. I'm one of them. I am a builder. Amelia sees it with horrifying clarity. She is the one who took that passion for learning and buried it in a secret folder. She is the one who snaps the laptop shut in shame when she hears Owen stir. She is the one who nods and agrees with her mother. Yes, I'm practical. Her family, her companion. They weren't her primary jailers. They just handed her the keys to a cell she had willingly locked from the inside because she was terrified of what was outside. The shame she felt was her own self-betrayal. We spend most of our lives, as the mystic P.D. Ouspensky noted, in a state of sleep. We are machines. We are not living. We are being lived. We react to the scripts we are given. We are the sum of our habits, our fears, and the expectations of others. We are mechanical. Amelia, in this moment, is experiencing the most terrifying thing a human can. She is, for the first time, waking up. She is seeing the machine. She is seeing the script she has been running. Harrison's words are the alarm clock, dragging her out of the comfortable, numb sleep of her borrowed life. And the first sight of reality is agonizing. Harrison seems to read her mind. He sees the panic in her eyes. The lesson is, stop waiting for the builders to approve your stone, he says, his voice firm but kind. Stop asking them to see its value. They cannot. They are blind to it. They are obsessed with their own blueprint. Your job, your only job, is to pick up that rejected, useless stone, your gift for connection, your love of teaching, and you start building your own foundation with it. The diploma is the finishing. Your skill is the foundation. That is where you must build. This was the lesson. It wasn't about her being good. It was about her taking responsibility for her own value, separate from the world's approval. She finally understands. She sees the prison. She sees the builders who maintain it, and she sees her own role as the chief warden. She sees the one stone that could be her key. She has the map. But this is the difference between seeing a prison and being free. This is the terrifying gap between consciousness and action. Harrison has given her the truth, but he cannot give her the courage. The pattern is revealed, the machine is visible, but she is still standing inside it. She now sees the bars clearly for the first time. But does she have the strength to actually break them? Or will the sleep be too tempting to return to? She walks home from the park, but she is not the same person who walked there. She feels electrified. The air seems sharper. The colors of the dying afternoon leaves are almost painfully vivid. Harrison's words are an engine, a new warm sun ignited in the cold, dead center of her chest. The stone which the builders rejected. Build your own foundation. It is not just an idea, it is a tool. It is a key. For the first time in her adult life, the grey fog of apathy has been burned away, replaced by a fragile, terrifying and brilliant hope. She has a map. She is no longer just a collection of failures. She is an architect, holding a rejected cornerstone. This new energy carries her all the way to her apartment door. She is vibrating with it. She thinks this time it will be different. The apartment is the same. The dim light, the silence, the man on the sofa, bathed in the now familiar blue glow. But she is different. She is armed. She is no longer the hollowed-out ghost from the night before. She is not seeking comfort. She is not begging for scraps of attention. She is a person with a gift. She has been seen, and she is about to test this new fragile reality against the old solid one. She is about to take her stone and see if it can withstand the pressure of her old life. She doesn't take off her coat. She stands in the middle of the room, a visitor. "Owen," she says. Her voice is not the small, hesitant murmur he is used to. It is clear. It is firm. He looks up, his eyes slow to focus, annoyed at the interruption. "Hey," she says, forcing a brightness she doesn't feel. I had an amazing conversation today. In the park. With that man I told you about. The retired principal." He just stares. He says nothing. He is waiting for her to finish so he can return to the scroll. She presses on, the new warm sun in her chest beginning to feel a little cold. "We were talking about my interest in teaching, in how kids learn, and he told me I have a gift." There. She did it. She took her stone, the one Harrison had just polished, and she presented it to the chief builder in her life. She waited, bracing, but also hoping. She was not asking for his approval. Or was she? She was testing. She was hoping he would see it too. His eyes, which had been blank, narrow. A look of genuine, profound confusion crosses his face. And then it happens. He laughs. It is not a cruel laugh. It is not a mean laugh. It is a soft, gentle, amused, and utterly pitying laugh. A gift, he says, the word teaching from her previous attempt hanging in the air. Amelia, come on. He sounds like he is speaking to a child. That's nice. But you need a degree for that, don't you? It's not a cute hobby. The words. A cute hobby. They are the same words he used before, but this time they are not just a dismissal. They are a verdict. They are the cold, hard, practical judgment of the builder who has looked at her cornerstone and declared it to be, in fact, rubble. The new warm sun in her chest does not just dim, it is instantly extinguished, as if by a vacuum. The electrification, the hope, the map, all of it collapses, turning to ice. Her internal monologue is a cascade of failure. He's right, of course he's right, it's ridiculous. That old man is just an old sentimental man. What did I expect? Harrison is wrong. The builders are right. I am a joke. I am a waitress with a cute hobby. The old script, the one that defines her as a fraud, rushes back in with the force of a tidal wave, drowning the new, fragile insight. The failure is absolute, and it is a new kind of pain. This is not the dull, numb ache of her old stagnation. This is a bright, sharp, agonizing pain. It is the pain of conscious failure. It is the pain of having seen the prison door, of having been handed the key, and of immediately, instinctively, using it to lock herself back inside. She had failed the first test. She had done the one thing Harrison had just warned her not to do. She had taken her stone, not to build with, but to ask a blind builder for his approval. There is a desperate ancient plea in the 51st Psalm. Create in me a pure heart, and renew a right spirit within me. This is not a religious wish. It is a profound, psychological admission. It is the cry of a soul that has just realized that consciousness is not enough. The person in that moment understands that their willpower is utterly useless. It is the recognition that the old heart, the old pattern, is so corrupt and so deep that it cannot be fixed. It must be replaced. Amelia's heart, her spirit, is a set of grooves, a system of habits carved over a lifetime. The most powerful of these habits is the desperate gravitational pull to seek validation from the very people who have none to give. This is the hard, cold truth of human change, a truth that Aristotle understood. He called it ethos. Character, he said, is just habit. We are not what we think or what we realize in a flash of insight. We are, quite simply, what we repeatedly do. Amelia's insight from Harrison was an event. Her lifetime of feeling worthless, of seeking validation, of agreeing to her practical label, that is a practice. Her new idea is a tiny seedling. Her old habit is a redwood, with roots that have broken the foundation of her entire life. She cannot defeat a redwood by looking at it. This is the inertia of the old self. The mystic Gurdjieff called these old patterns buffers. They are the psychological shock absorbers we build to protect ourselves from the pain of real change. Amelia's habit of deferring to Owen, her habit of believing the family script, these are her buffers. The moment she tried to change, the buffers engaged, and the cute hobby remark was the sound of the system resetting itself, pulling her back into the comfortable, known sleep. She has just learned the most brutal lesson of transformation. Consciousness is not a key. It is just a very bright, very painful flashlight, and it is currently showing her, in perfect, agonizing detail, exactly how locked the door still is. She returns to the park the next day. The walk is a walk of shame, but not in the way we usually mean it. It is the deep, profound, and specific shame of a person who has betrayed themselves. The brief, electric hope she felt from Harrison's lesson is gone, replaced by the cold, heavy, and sickeningly familiar weight of her own inadequacy. The failure with Owen was not just a failure, it was a verdict. It was, she is convinced, the final proof that she is exactly what her family's script and her companions' pitying laugh say she is, a practical, foolish girl with a cute hobby. She is a child who was handed a key, and she immediately, instinctively, used it to lock herself back in her own cell. She finds Harrison on the same bench. She approaches, not with the thirst of yesterday, but with the flat, dead-eyed resignation of a failed student. She does not even sit. She stands before him, a defendant. "It didn't work," she says. Her voice is brittle. I told him, my companion, I told him what you said, that I had a gift." She has to force the next words out, the humiliation of it burning in her throat. "He laughed. He asked if it was a cute hobby." Again. She looks at him, her eyes pleading, desperate for him to see. "So you were wrong, or I'm just broken. It's useless. He's right. It's just a joke." Harrison listens to this confession, his expression completely unchanged. He does not look surprised. He does not look disappointed. He just looks knowing. He nods, very slowly, as if she has just confirmed an obvious, expected fact. "Yes," he says, his voice quiet, matter-of-fact. "Of course he did. And of course you failed. You failed the moment you walked through that door. You failed because you took the most valuable, sacred thing you have, and you handed it to a blind man, demanding that he describe its color. You took your stone not to build with, but to ask for permission to build. You are still asking the builders to approve of a design they cannot and will not ever understand." He leans forward, and his voice, though still quiet, becomes sharp, precise, and utterly intolerant of her self-pity. "You failed," he says, "because you are still making this all about you. You are still trapped in the smallest, most boring question in the universe. Am I good enough? Am I a fraud? Does he think I'm valuable? You are suffocating in the first person singular. You are obsessed with your own self-diagnosis, your own pain, your own perceived failure. But the pain isn't the problem. The self-obsession is the problem. You are still trying to fix yourself. You are still trying to prove yourself. And that is why you will always fail." This is the second, deeper lesson. This is the pivot. "Amelia," he says, "the solution to this pain you feel, it is not to fix yourself. The solution is to forget yourself. You have to get you out of the way entirely. This gift you have, this ability to connect with that child, this passion for how a mind works, it was not given to you. It was given through you. It is not for you. It is for other people. It is a tool, and a tool only has value when it is used. You are miserable because you are hoarding this beautiful, complex tool, polishing it, looking at it, and asking everyone who passes by if it's a good tool, instead of just building the house." We see the click in her mind. It is a terrifying, paradigm-shifting realization. All she has ever done is analyze herself, hate herself, try to fix herself, or seek validation for herself. The idea of just letting go of that entire, exhausting project is radical. It's not for me, it's for them, the kids, the child in the park. This is the great, counterintuitive pivot of human existence. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, staring into the abyss of the Nazi death camps, discovered this one unbreakable truth. He saw that the prisoners who had the will to survive were not the strongest, but those who had a why outside of themselves, a person to see again, a book to finish writing, a service to perform. Meaning, Frankl realized, is not something we find by looking inward. It is something we create by looking outward. He called it self-transcendence. It is the paradox of a happy life. The only way out of the prison of the self is to find a purpose that is bigger than the self. This is the wisdom Harrison is giving her. He is handing her the antidote to the poison of her internal critic. The critic, her family's script, her companion's voice, they all thrive on the self-focused question, "Are you good enough?" Harrison is telling her to simply stop asking it. It is the wrong question. It is an ego question. It is a trap. She is reeling, processing this. "So, I just stop asking if I'm a fraud," she whispers. Harrison nods, a faint, rare smile touching his lips. "It's a boring question," he says. "Ask a better one. Don't ask, 'Who am I?' or 'Do I have value?' Ask, 'How can I be useful?' Stop asking, 'Am I good enough?' and start asking, 'Where is the need?' Your gift isn't for you, Amelia. It's for the people who need it. Go find them. The rest, the self-doubt, the noise, It all gets very, very quiet when you are truly busy working. This is the map. Not just the diagnosis, but the prescription. But a map is just a piece of paper. It is not the territory. She finally has the why. But does she have the courage to find the how? She is home. The echo of Harrison's words, his final radical prescription, is a warm ember in her chest. It's not about you. It's about service. Forget yourself. Be useful. This is it. This is the answer. It is a why, so powerful it provides an immediate how. The fog of her self-obsession, the endless, circular and exhausting analysis of her own worthlessness, has finally parted. She sees a path. It is not a grand, glorious highway. It is a single, small, concrete step. The flyers, the micro-valor, as the synops would call it, using her passion to solve a small, real problem for someone else. She goes to her purse, her movements now crisp and defined. She takes out her wallet. Inside is the $20 bill from the diner, the one a customer had left her with that note. You have a kind face. It is the only money she has that feels entirely hers, earned from the old dead life. It feels right. It is a perfect symbolic act. She will use the last wages of her imprisonment to buy the first stone for her liberation. She will burn the old world to fuel the new one. She lays the bill on the table, her hand resting on it, ready to act. And then it comes. It is not a whisper, it is a roar, a cold, clear, supremely rational voice that rises up from the base of her skull. Who do you think you are? The voice is not angry, it is condescending, disappointed. It is the voice of her practical self, the one her family has so carefully cultivated. Let's be logical, it says, its tone dripping with sarcasm. You are a college dropout, you are a waitress, you have no degree, you have no credentials, you have no experience. Help with homework, you are a fraud. The word hits her like a physical impact. The voice is just getting started. It becomes a prosecutor laying out an airtight case. You're not helping anyone, Amelia. You are stealing from them. You are planning to take money from a desperate mother, money you do not deserve, for a skill you do not possess. That little magic trick in the park, that was a fluke. That was a lucky guess. You are not a teacher. You are a liar. You are an imposter, and you are about to prove it to the whole world. She freezes. The $20 bill suddenly feels hot like stolen goods. The voice is so logical. It sounds true. We have to understand what this is. This is not doubt. This is an immune response. Her old established identity, the waitress, the fraud, the practical failure, is a powerful, entrenched organism. Her new, fragile purpose, her new identity as a builder, is a foreign body. It is an invader. And this cold, rational, internal voice is the body's autoimmune system, rising up with overwhelming force to kill the new, healthy cell before it can possibly multiply. This is the guardian of the old stagnation. This is the jailer of the known prison, and he has just heard the first tap of a hammer on the wall. The writer Stephen Pressfield gave this force a name. He called it resistance. He identified it as a universal, impersonal, and malignant force whose one and only job is to stop creation. It does not rise up when you are watching television. It does not appear when you are numb. It rises with the strength of a tsunami at the precise moment you decide to move from the old dead life to a new, higher one. It is a law of physics. The more important the act is to your soul's evolution, the more powerful and vicious the resistance will be. This voice she hears is not a sign that she is on the wrong path. It is the first, screaming proof that she is, for the first time, on the right one. This resistance is cunning. It doesn't fight fair. It attacks at the weakest point. It is what Carl Jung called the shadow. It weaponizes all the parts of ourselves we have disowned and hidden in the dark. It takes our deepest, most secret fears, the fear of being a fraud, the fear of public humiliation, and it presents them to us not as fears, but as objective, indisputable facts. This is the enemy rising up, as the third psalm describes. The ancient text cries out for a shield. But you, O Lord, are a shield around me. This is a psychological prayer. It is not a plea for a miracle. It is a desperate search for a mental defense against this internal, self-generated, and utterly brutal assault. Amelia is frozen, the $20 bill clutched in her hand, the war raging behind her eyes. The internal voice has paralyzed her, and just as she is at her absolute weakest, resistance, the cunning general, sends in its external reinforcement. Owen looks up from his phone. He sees her. He sees the money. He sees the pile of neatly printed flyers she had made in her burst of hope. He sees the determination in her face, a look that is new and to him deeply alarming. He reads the simple text on the flyer: "Help with homework. Focus on patience." His face twists, not in anger, but in that same terrible, familiar pity. "Seriously?" he says. The word is a gut punch. You're really going through with this for help with homework?" He shakes his head and a small, sad, condescending laugh escapes him. "Amelia," he says, his voice the sound of a parent correcting a foolish child. You're setting yourself up to fail. You're setting yourself up to fail. There it is." The external jailer has just confirmed, word for word, the exact accusation of the internal jailer. The prison walls are now visible, solid and reinforced. The voice in her head was just an opinion. But Owen's voice, that is evidence. That is the real world telling her, once and for all, that her purpose is a joke. The ember from Harrison's lesson is completely extinguished, replaced by the Arctic cold of her old, familiar reality. The new lesson about service is now in a direct, head-on collision with a lifetime's habit of doubt. And the habit is winning. He has said it. You're setting yourself up to fail. The external voice has perfectly, completely, and finally aligned with the internal one. The cold, logical prosecutor in her head and the pitying, practical man on her sofa have joined hands. They are in total agreement. This, for Amelia, should be the end. This is the checkmate. The evidence is in. She is a fraud, and her purpose is a cute hobby. The $20 bill in her hand, the one meant for liberation, now feels like an exhibit in her trial. The practical thing to do, the sane thing to do, is to put the money back in her wallet, apologize to Owen for being so foolish, and go to bed. She is frozen. The silence in the room is absolute, heavier even than the silence of the digital ghost. He is looking at her, waiting for her to concede, for her to break. And in this moment, two voices are screaming in her head. The first is Owen's, which is also her mother's, which is also her own internal critic. It is the voice of her entire life. He's right. It's safe here. It's warm. The diner is a paycheck. This is a joke. You'll be humiliated. Stop this, right now. It is a chorus of fear, dressed up as logic. But then, a second voice, much quieter, rises. It is Harrison's. It's not about you. It's about service. You are still asking the blind to see. Stop asking. Start building. The two voices are at war. He's right. You will fail. Verse, it's not about you. You must serve. You are a fraud. Verse, your gift is for others. The tension is unbearable. It is the tension of a lifetime, condensed into a single, terrible, silent moment. And then, something breaks. It is not a surge of confidence. It is not a wave of courage. It is exhaustion. In one sudden, quiet, and final instant, Amelia realizes that she is more tired of this room, this man, this pity, this endless, cringing, hollow version of herself, than she is afraid of that. The fear of failure is still massive, but the exhaustion of her inauthenticity is, for the first time, just one tiny, fractional degree heavier. She looks at Owen, still on the sofa, bathed in his blue light. She looks at her waitress uniform hanging on the back of the bedroom door, a polyester ghost. She looks at the $20 bill in her hand. She doesn't argue with him. She doesn't defend herself. She doesn't try to explain. She says nothing at all. She turns her back to him, shoves her feet into her shoes, grabs her keys, and walks out the door. The sound of the lock clicking shut behind her is the loudest sound she has ever heard. She has not won the argument. She has simply left the battlefield. The walk to the 24-hour print shop is a new kind of terror. The internal critic is still screaming, but its voice is dimmer now, muffled by the rhythm of her footsteps. The act of moving, the simple, physical, one foot in front of the other, is its own kind of answer. This is the moment Søren Kierkegaard defined as the leap of faith. It is not a leap to a guaranteed landing. It is a leap away from an unbearable starting point. It is an act that is, by the world's standards, objectively absurd. She is a broke waitress walking into the night to spend her last dollars on a fantasy against the advice of everyone who defines her reality. The print shop is fluorescent, sterile, and smells of hot toner. She hands the $20 bill to the bored cashier. This is the crossing of her Rubicon. It is the burning of the ship. That money was her safety. It was her chariot, the physical symbol of her old, safe, known prison. And as she hands it over, she is enacting the wisdom of the 20th Psalm. Some trust in chariots, but we will trust in something else. She is trusting in the process. She is trusting in the need. She is trusting in the quiet, solid voice of an old man in a park. She is trusting in the stone that everyone, including herself, had told her was worthless. She walks out of the print shop holding a small, warm stack of 100 cheap, simple flyers. The paper is thin. The font is basic. They are, by all objective standards, unimpressive. But as she holds them, the feeling that washes over her is not euphoria. It is not victory. It is not even joy. It is a profound, cold, and absolutely calm terror. It is the feeling of a jumper who has just stepped off the cliff and is now in freefall, her entire life dependent on an idea that has not yet been tested. The decision is made. The ships are burned. She is now, for the first time in her life, fully committed, and she has no guarantee at all that she will not crash. She does it. The act itself is small, mundane. She walks through her neighborhood in the flat grey light of the next morning, her coat pulled tight. The stack of 100 flyers, still warm from the printer, feels impossibly heavy in her hand. Each one she posts is a small public death. She pins one to the corkboard at the laundromat, feeling the eyes of the other patrons on her back, certain they can smell her fraudulence. She tapes another to a telephone pole, the cheap paper flapping in the wind, looking instantly like trash. Help with homework. Focus on patience. It looks ridiculous, childish, insane. With every flyer, the voice in her head, the one that sounds so rational, whispers, "This is it. Your public humiliation. You are a waitress. You are a fraud." And now everyone knows. Then she goes home, and she waits. The apartment becomes a new kind of prison. It is no longer a place of numb stagnation. It is a torture chamber of anticipation. The center of this new world is the telephone on her kitchen counter. It is no longer an appliance. It is an oracle. It is a judge. It is the single object that holds the verdict for her entire life. She sits at the small table, staring at it. The silence is not quiet. It is loud. It is a roaring, screaming, active void. She picks up the receiver to check for a dial tone for the third time in an hour. It's working. The universe is not broken. It is just, apparently, not interested. A day passes. Then 2. The stack of flyers on her counter does not shrink, but the hope that fueled their creation is shriveling. The silence of the phone is the only answer she has received. The prosecutor in her mind, the one who gave her that terrifyingly logical speech before she left to print the flyers, has returned. And now he has evidence. "See?" It whispers, its voice no longer a scream, but a calm, satisfied, superior sneer. "I told you. No one called. No one will call." It was a silly, childish idea. You spent your last dollars on garbage. That old man, he was just a sentimental fool. Owen was right. The practical script, the one her family wrote, reasserts its power. It was right all along. This is the great, terrible test that comes after the leap. It is what we might call the great silence. There is an ancient, agonized cry in the 22nd Psalm. It is not a gentle prayer, it is a roar of confusion and abandonment. My God, why have you forsaken me?" We often read this as a crisis of faith in a deity, but it is a perfect psychological blueprint for the crisis of faith in a purpose. It is the human soul screaming into the void after it has taken its biggest risk. It is the jumper who has stepped off the cliff as Amelia did, only to find that there is no wind, no uplift. Just silence. Just falling. This is the universe's final brutal test. Did you really mean it? Amelia is failing this test. The silence is crushing her. She is not, as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus would argue, being harmed by the event. The event is neutral. The phone is not ringing. She is being annihilated by the judgment she is attaching to it. This means I am a worthless failure. She is mistaking the silence for a verdict, and she is not alone in this judgment. Owen walks through the kitchen. He has been observing her behavior, the waiting, the staring at the phone with a kind of sad, detached pity. He sees the phone silent on the counter. He sees her staring at it. He sighs, shaking his head. The phone's not ringing, is it? He doesn't say it with malice. He says it with the gentle, practical finality of a doctor, confirming a terminal diagnosis. I told you so. And those words, that simple external observation, are the hammer blow that shatters her last bit of resolve. It is the real world confirming that her internal prosecutor was right. The silence is a verdict. The old man was wrong. Her hope was a joke. The obstacle in her path, this great silence, is not, as the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius would say, the way. It is not a challenge to be met. It is, she is now convinced, a wall, a definitive, absolute and final end. This is the crushing weight of reality. She sacrificed everything. She spent her last $20. She alienated her companion. She took the leap. And the universe has responded not with a fight, not with a challenge, but with the single most devastating weapon it has: indifference. The flyers are just paper, flapping on a pole, ignored by a world that has no need for her gift. She has not just failed. She has been proven to be irrelevant. And as she stares at the phone, the silence is no longer just a void. It is the sound of her own ultimate and final worthlessness. The phone rings. The sound is an explosion. It is so loud, so violent in the heavy, dead silence of the room that she flinches, a sharp, painful jolt of adrenaline. It is a physical shock. Her heart, which has been a cold, heavy stone in her chest for 2 days, is suddenly hammering, a wild bird in a cage. Someone called. Someone called. Someone called. The thought is a scream. This is it. The verdict. The oracle is finally speaking. She lunges for the receiver, her hand clumsy, fumbling. Hello? Her voice is a dry croak, barely audible. She is bracing. Is it a mother? Is it a client? Is it the universe, finally? Finally answering her? Amelia. Oh, thank God. The voice is not a mother. It is Dave, her boss from the diner. The sound of her old prison, her old script, comes flooding through the line, cheerful, desperate, and completely unaware of the war he is interrupting. Amelia, listen. You are a lifesaver. That new girl, the one I hired, she's a disaster. She's late. She's sloppy. The customers hate her. I need you back. She just stands there, mute, the receiver cold against her ear. She is suspended, unable to process. He misinterprets her silence as a negotiation. Listen, he says, his voice rushing. I'll give you a raise. $1 an hour, just, please. Can you come in tomorrow morning? A raise, $1 an hour. The words are not abstract. They are not a gift. They are not a purpose. They are real. They are rent. They are groceries. They are bread. And the feeling that washes over her is not joy. It is a profound, sickening, and overwhelming relief. The terrible, silent, falling sensation of the last 2 days, the terror of the unanswered phone. It stops. Instantly. She is no longer in free fall. A hand has reached down into the abyss and grabbed her. She is safe. Her internal critic, the one that had been sneering at her, is now satisfied. See? It whispers, its voice now soothing, kind. See? You are valuable. You are needed. You are a good waitress. This is real. That was a dream. This is where you belong. Owen has been watching her, his face a mask of anxious pity. He can read the entire conversation from her expression, the shock, the confusion, the sudden, terrible relief. He stands up from the sofa. Is that Dave? He whispers, his voice full of a desperate, sudden hope. Is it the job? Did the new girl quit? She nods, her eyes wide, still holding the phone. Take it, he says. It is not a suggestion. It is a plea. Amelia, please, take the job. Take the raise. Let's just go back to normal. This other stuff. This idea. He gestures to the silent phone. It's killing you. Just come home. This is the great ancient temptation. There is a line in the 73rd Psalm, a raw confession. My feet had almost slipped, my steps had nearly faltered. The poet admits he saw the prosperity of the easy path, the stability of those who were not on the hard road of purpose, and he almost gave in. He almost faltered. Amelia's feet are slipping. She is standing at that exact, terrible crossroads. The path of her purpose is cold, silent, and has just been proven a failure. The path of her old prison is warm, inviting, and is now offering her a reward to return. It is offering normalcy. It is offering an end to the agonizing, isolating, and terrifying burden of choice. The philosopher Dostoevsky wrote about this. In his parable of the Grand Inquisitor, the Inquisitor, a figure of authority, confronts a returned savior. He tells him that people do not want the terrible, agonizing freedom of choice and meaning. It is too heavy for them. What they crave, he says, is security. They want bread. He says, give us bread, and we will follow you. Take our freedom, but feed us. This is the scene in Amelia's kitchen. Her boss, Dave, is the Inquisitor. He is offering her bread, $1 an hour raise. He is offering her an end to her painful freedom. Just come in tomorrow, he says. He is offering to tell her what to do. And she wants to say yes. The relief is so profound it is making her dizzy. This is what the psychologist Erich Fromm identified as the fear of freedom. We are, as a species, terrified of the responsibility of being our true, authentic selves. We will run, screaming, back to the safety of any known prison, any script, any authority that will just take the weight from us. The diner is her known prison. The practical script is her authority. And Owen, her companion, is the voice of that prison begging her, please, just come back inside where it's safe. Stop trying. It's too hard. The silence on the phone stretches. Dave is waiting. Amelia? You there tomorrow? She is holding the receiver so tightly her knuckles are white. She has the offer. She has the safety. She has the bread. She has the proof that she was a fool and the path to absolution. All she has to do is say one word. Yes. All she has to do is accept the security of the prison she knows, and the agonizing, silent, terrifying freedom of the unknown will finally, mercifully be over. Will she accept the comfort of the prison she knows, or will she choose the painful, unproven, and terrifying liberty of the unknown? She is standing in the kitchen, the receiver cold and heavy in her hand. Dave is on the line, the sound of the diner, of her old, safe prison, buzzing in her ear. Amelia, you there? He presses, his voice a mix of impatience and managerial cheer. Tomorrow. Owen is watching her, his face a silent, desperate plea. Take it. Take the bread. Take the safety. Be normal. She can feel her feet slipping. The relief is so total, so seductive. It is an end to the terror of the silent phone. It is a return to a place where she knows her value, even if that value is just $1 an hour raise. She is at the very edge of the cliff of her old life, ready to jump back in. She starts, and she is about to say yes. It is on her tongue. The word is formed. But then, stop asking the blind to see. Start building. Harrison's voice. It is not a memory. It is an echo, a resonance, faint and distant, but there. She has one last question. She has one last authority to consult, the one person who saw the stone. She has been consulting the builders of her prison, Owen, her family, and the builders of her past, Dave. She has not consulted the architect of her future. Dave, she fumbles. I have to think about it. I'll call you back. She hangs up the phone before he can reply. Owen explodes. What are you doing? His voice is not pitying now, it is terrified. It's a raise, Amelia, it's a job. What is wrong with you? Are you insane? She doesn't answer him. She doesn't have an answer. She just knows she has one last move. She has one final external hope, one last prince to put her trust in. She grabs her keys, ignoring his shouts. Where are you going? He yells, following her to the door. Stop this! Just stop! She pulls the door open and runs. She flees the apartment, not as an act of courage, but as an act of pure, unadulterated desperation. She is running from the unbearable known of the diner toward the one person who might have the answer. She runs to the park. The air is cold and it burns her lungs. She is not a seeker, she is a beggar. She is a desperate, failed student, running to her teacher to beg him for the answer. "Tell me what to do," she is screaming in her mind. "Please, just tell me what to do. Tell me to say no to Dave. Tell me the phone will ring. Tell me it's not a joke." She needs him to be her shield. She needs him to be her courage. She bursts into the park, her eyes scanning for the bench, for that familiar, calm, still figure. The bench is empty. A cold, new, and far more terrible panic sets in. It is a different emptiness from the existential void. This is the emptiness of abandonment. "No," she whispers. "No, no, no. He's just late. He'll be here." She waits. She paces. The sun is getting low. He is not coming. She sees a woman walking her dog, a regular she has seen here before. "Excuse me," Amelia says, her voice trembling. The older man, who sits on this bench. Mr. Harrison. Have you seen him?" The woman stops, her expression kind. "Oh, Harrison? Such a lovely man. His daughter was in town. She was so worried about him being all alone. She came and packed him up. He moved out of state to go live with her. Left, must have been last week." The words, "last week." They are the final killing blow. They land with a quiet, sickening finality. He was already gone. He was gone before she printed the flyers. He was gone before she took her leap. He gave her the map, and then, without a word, he left her in the wilderness. The last single flickering light in her universe has just been snuffed out. She is now completely and totally alone. The one builder who saw her value has vanished. Her one external savior, the man she was running to, her muleta or emotional crutch, he is gone. This, we see, is the mentor's final, greatest, and most brutal lesson. It is the lesson he could only teach through his absence. There is a line in the 146th Psalm: "Do not put your trust in princes, in whom there is no help." Harrison, her prince, her human savior, there is no help in him. Not because he is unkind, but because he is human. He has his own life. The student who depends on the master forever is not a master. They are a parasite. The true master, the true teacher, knows that the student's final test must be walked alone. He had to disappear so that she would be forced to stop asking him for the answers and finally become him. But she doesn't see this. She is not a philosopher. She is a terrified, abandoned child. She stumbles to the empty bench and collapses. This is the belly of the whale. This is the inmost cave. She has no guide. She has no job. She didn't say yes to Dave. She has no partner. Owen is now the enemy, the voice of the prison. She has no purpose. The phone is silent. She has no mentor. She has nothing. She is at the absolute, final, and inescapable bottom. She is left with only the choice, naked and terrible, and no one in the entire universe is coming to tell her what to be. She does not run back to the apartment. There is no energy left for that. She walks. It is the walk of a person who has already lost, a soldier returning from a battle that was, it turns in, a massacre. The park is behind her, an empty, hollow space where her last desperate hope just evaporated. The city lights are a blur. She feels nothing, not anger, not sadness, not even the cold, sterile apathy from before. This is a new, lower level. It is the void, the final, definitive knowledge of her own complete and total abandonment. She has no job, she has no purpose, she has no mentor. She is, in every sense that matters, utterly alone. She puts her key in the lock. The click is quiet, but it sounds to her like a final, damning judgment. She opens the door, and the scene that greets her is the perfect visual summary of her entire life. It is the living, breathing image of her isolation. The apartment is dark, the television is off, and there on the sofa is Owen. He is not a person. He is a silhouette, a shape, made visible only by the cold, blue, flickering light of the phone in his hand. He is a ghost, haunting her life, illuminated by a machine. He is right there, 10 feet away, and he is a million miles gone. He looks up, his face pale in the glow. He sees her. He sees the absolute, crushing, and final failure written on every line of her body. He sees the ruin. He doesn't have to say, "I told you so." He doesn't have to say, "The phone never rang, did it?" He doesn't have to ask about the old man, his expression does it all. It is a look of profound, exhausted and almost sad pity. It is the look of a person who has been waiting for an addict to relapse and is now, finally, proven right. His pity is the final nail. It is the last, suffocating confirmation. He turns his eyes back to the screen. She walks past him, a ghost walking past a ghost. She goes to the bedroom and closes the door, but it provides no barrier. The cold blue light from the other room is still there, a pale, flickering line under the door, a reminder of the living dead presence in her home. She sits on the edge of the bed in the total darkness. The inventory is swift. The job at the diner, gone. She never called him back. The new path, a total, silent, humiliating failure. The man in the next room, an empty shell, a partner who offers no partnership. The mentor, the one single person who saw her, vanished. He too has abandoned her. There is an ancient text, the 88th Psalm, that stands alone in its terrible honesty. It is the one psalm that does not end with a glimmer of hope. It does not promise that joy comes in the morning. It is a raw, unflinching psychological portrait of this exact moment. It is the human soul in a state of complete desolation, abandoned by every force it once trusted. It does not ask for rescue. It simply states its reality. And it ends with one single, devastating line. Darkness is my closest companion. This is not poetry. This is a diagnosis. This is Amelia's reality. This is what the great mystics like Carl Jung would identify as the dark night of the soul. It is not a metaphor. It is a psychological process. It is the stage of transformation where the old self, the persona, the waitress, the old borrowed script, the practical one in all of it, has to be dissolved. It is a terrifying, agonizing period of desolation where you are not who you were, but you are not yet who you will be. You are nothing. You are in the void, the wilderness. The old, familiar and hateful you is dying, and there is, as of yet, nothing to take its place. She can feel this. She is in that desert, that wilderness the philosopher Thomas Merton wrote about. It is the place of terrible clarity, the place you are forced into when all your illusions are burned away. Harrison was an illusion, a crutch. She was leaning on him, on his wisdom instead of owning it. The hope of the phone ringing was an illusion, another external savior. The approval of Owen was the oldest, most toxic illusion of all. Now, they are all gone. There are no more crutches. There is no one left to trust. There is nothing to hold on to. There is only the hard, cold desert floor. And the most exquisite, refined form of this torture is the man in the next room. His presence is the proof. If the apartment were empty, she would just be alone. But his presence makes her abandoned. He is the living, breathing symbol of her isolation. She can hear the faint, tinny sound of a video. She can see the blue light under the door. He is right there, a human, a companion, and he is as inaccessible to her as a star. The cold, digital light is the only warmth in her home, and it is a light she cannot share. This is the absolute, perfect and final image of her isolation. This is the true bottom. Not the emotional, messy, screaming collapse, not the apathy of the existential void she felt before. This is a cold, silent and clear bottom. She sees everything, and everything is nothing. She is not a waitress. She is not a teacher. She is not a partner. She is not a student. She has no definition. She is a failed idea. She is a rejected stone that turned out to be, in the end, just rubble. The silence from the kitchen, the silence from the phone, and the silence from the man on the sofa are all in agreement. And so the final bleak question forms, not with anger, but with a cold, simple, factual curiosity. Is this it? Is this the end of the story? Is this, after all, what she was? A failure. She sits in the darkness, a statue in a cold, unlit room. The only sign of life in the entire apartment is that pale, blue, flickering line under the door. It is the heartbeat of the ghost in the next room, a constant, silent reminder of her complete isolation. The inventory is finished. Every door she has pushed has been locked. The path back to the diner, the safe prison, feels as impossible as the path forward. Her mentor, her one point of light, is gone. Her partner is a living silhouette. Her new purpose was a delusion, a fantasy that shattered against the hard, cold, and final indifference of a silent telephone. And then, it just stops. The war inside her head, the part of her that was trying, the part that was striving, the part that was fighting so hard to be a teacher, to be useful, to find a purpose, to be worthy, it all just dissolves. It is not a conscious decision. It is a system failure. It is the quiet, final click of an engine that has, at last, run out of all fuel. The internal prosecutor, the voice that called her a fraud, goes silent. Not because it was defeated, but because its case has been so overwhelmingly and finally proven. There is nothing left to argue. The thirst, the desperate need for an answer, is gone. She stops trying to solve the riddle of her own life. She lets out a breath, a single slow exhale. It feels like the first one she has taken in 30 years. And with that breath, the admission forms, not in words, but in her bones. Okay, I'm done. I'm not anything. Not a waitress, not a teacher, not this. I give up. There is no path. There is no gift. There was just a nice old man and a very, very foolish girl. Owen was right. My mother was right. The phone was right. I failed. And that's it. The feeling that replaces the agony, the fear, and the shame is not peace. It is nothing. It is a perfect, clean, empty void. It is the silence after the bomb. The war is over. She lost. This is the moment we, as humans, fear above all else. It is the death of the ego. It is the final abject admission of defeat. We spend our entire lives running from this specific stillness, building walls of identity, our jobs, our relationships, our hobbies, our beliefs, all to protect ourselves from this one terrible central truth, the moment of not being. We are terrified of the void, and so we fill our lives with noise, with striving, with trying, to ensure we never have to face it. We would rather be a waitress, a failure, anything than be nothing. But the mystics, the sages from every tradition, tell us a secret. This moment, this kenosis or emptying, this is not the end. It is the prerequisite. It is the non-negotiable first step. You cannot fill a cup that is already full, and Amelia's cup was overflowing. It was full of junk. It was full of a borrowed second-hand identity. It was full of her family's expectations. It was full of her companion's pity. It was full of her own self-loathing, her own fear, and most of all her own effort. She was trying so hard she had no room left for anything real. There is a line in the 46th Psalm, one of the most profound and misunderstood commands in all of ancient literature. Be still and know. This is not a gentle suggestion to be quiet or to meditate. It is an urgent, almost violent command to stop doing. Stop striving. Stop fighting. Stop trying to impose your will on the universe to force an outcome. Be still. And now, in the stillness of her total, absolute failure, the deafening, lifelong noise of her own ego, her own trying, has finally gone silent. She is no longer trying to be a teacher. She is no longer trying to be a good partner. She is no longer trying to be anything at all. She has at last stopped. This is what the modern sage Eckhart Tolle calls surrender to the now. It is the cessation of all resistance to what is. And what is that Amelia is a failed person, sitting alone in a dark room, in a silent apartment, next to an empty man. She has stopped arguing with this reality. She has stopped trying to bargain with it. She has finally accepted it. She has let go of the rope. She is in freefall. The philosopher Alan Watts spoke of this as the wisdom of insecurity. We spend our lives terrified of falling, terrified of having no solid ground beneath our feet. We kick and thrash, desperate to find something, anything to stand on. This is that moment. Surrender is the realization that there is no solid ground, and it is the choice to stop kicking. Amelia has stopped kicking. She has accepted the void. She has accepted the fall. And in that acceptance, in that total, absolute and final surrender of her own will, something new becomes possible. The noise of her striving, her wanting, her needing. It has been so loud for so long that it has drowned out every other signal in the universe. But now, in the void, At point zero, in the absolute, silent, and terrifying stillness of her own defeat, a new signal, a different kind of sound, for the very first time, has a chance to be heard. Is this truly the end of her story? Or is it, at long last, the beginning of the real one? It is the deepest, darkest, and quietest hour of the night. She is still sitting on the edge of the bed, a ghost in her own bedroom. The war is over. The striving has stopped. The absolute, final, and cold acceptance of her own failure is complete. She is nothing. She is not a teacher. She is not a waitress. She is not a partner. She is just a void. A person who has been emptied of all identity, all hope, and all illusion. There are no more crutches. There are no more saviors. There is only the silence of the dark room and the pale, mocking blue line of light from under the door. She has, at last, surrendered. And in that precise, absolute zero point of silence, the phone rings. The sound is a physical, violent, and agonizing violation. It is an electric shock. It is an explosion in a tomb. Her entire body seizes, a gasp of pure animal terror stuck in her throat. She stares at the door at the line of light. The phone is in the kitchen. It is ringing again. It is not a dream. It is real. Her first, immediate, panicked thought is, Dave, the diner. He's calling back. It is the prison, calling to reclaim her. It is the bread she had refused, calling again to offer her a final, safe surrender. The third ring. She stands, her legs wooden, moving on a numb, dead autopilot. She is not moving toward hope. She is moving toward the inevitable, to answer the call of her old, dead life. She walks past Owen, who is still a silhouette, his face illuminated by the blue light. A digital ghost. He seems annoyed by the ringing, a disturbance in his own void. She gets to the kitchen. She picks up the receiver, bracing for Dave's voice. Hello? Her voice is a dry, cracked, and lifeless thing. It is the voice of the empty room she just left. A pause. Then a woman's voice, unfamiliar, hesitant. Hello, is this Amelia? It is not Dave. It is not her mother. It is new. Yes? Amelia says, her mind a complete blank, unable to process this new data. Hi. You don't know me, the woman says, her voice nervous but warm. My name is Sarah. I was in the park a few days ago. My son, Leo, he was having a terrible time with his math homework. He was crying. And you came over. Amelia's hand holding the phone begins to tremble. It is the mother. Her mind, which had been a still, dead, cold void, is suddenly painfully not. 1,000 images are flashing, colliding, the boy's red, tear-streaked face, the twigs, the pebbles, the pirates. You have a gift. Harrison's voice. Stop asking the blind to see. Owen's laugh. A cute hobby. The silent, mocking phone. And now, this. The call. But the timing is, it is wrong. Or it is perfectly, terrifyingly right. The call did not come when she was hoping for it. It did not come when she was striving for it, when she was staring at the phone, willing it to ring, begging the universe to prove her value. It came when she had given up. This is the epiphany. It is not a gentle, warm light. It is a blinding, painful, and instantaneous click. It is a total reordering of her entire universe, happening in the 3 seconds the mother pauses to take a breath. It's not about me. The realization hits her with the force of a physical blow, her entire agonizing multi-year crisis, her failure, her fraudulence, her worth. It was all a trap. It was, as Harrison said, the most boring, self-obsessed, and irrelevant question in the universe. She was trying to solve the problem of herself, but herself was never the problem. This is what Viktor Frankl saw in The Darkness. It is the great central human paradox. Meaning and the self cannot be pursued. They are not a goal. They are a consequence. They are the byproduct of forgetting yourself in the service of something or someone else. The moment she was with that child, she was not Amelia the waitress. She was not Amelia the fraud. She was not thinking about her value. She was just helping. She was, as the philosopher Martin Buber would say, in a true I-thou relationship, she was not an I observing an it. She was a human, connecting to a human. And in that one, single, authentic moment of service, Her self did not just get fixed, it disappeared. And that was the answer. The mother is talking again. I hope this isn't weird, she says, but I found your flyer, the one you put up in the laundromat. I kept it. Honestly, I was too nervous to call. But Leo, he's been asking about you. He called you the pirate lady. A small, shaky laugh. I know your flyer said the first session is free, but I was wondering, are you available tomorrow? I will pay you. I will gladly pay you. Please. The words are a torrent. Are you available? I will pay you. The offer is not for bread, it is for purpose. Amelia looks at the dark kitchen. She looks at the pale blue line of light still flickering under her bedroom door. The darkness is no longer her companion. It is just a dark room. The silence is no longer a verdict. It is just quiet. And Harrison. She finally understands his last, greatest lesson. His absence. He didn't abandon her. He graduated her. He took away the crutch so she would have to stand on the foundation she had, until this exact second, refused to see. The builders, her family, Owen, they had looked at her identity and found it worthless. Harrison had looked at her function and found it essential. And this call from this mother, this was not the universe rescuing her. This was the universe hiring her. This was the world with its real, tangible and specific pain asking for her specific, tangible and real gift. It was never about her. It was always about the need. It was always about the stone. The builders of her old life had rejected it. But now a new builder, a desperate mother with a son named Leo, was asking for that exact stone to build a foundation for her child. She takes a breath. It is a new breath. It is the breath of a person who has just been made. Yes, Amelia says, and the voice that comes out is not her own. It is clear. It is solid. It is calm. Yes, Sarah, I am. Tomorrow would be perfect. She is no longer a person asking request. She is a person answering what is the need. It is a beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely revolutionary idea. But she is still a person sitting in a dark kitchen with no money, no job, and a ghost in the next room. What in the cold, hard light of day does she possibly do now? She hangs up the phone. The click of the receiver returning to the cradle is a period, a definitive end to the old, long, and agonizing sentence of her self-obsession. The kitchen is still dark. The apartment is still silent. The man on the sofa, her companion, is still a pale digital ghost, staring at her, his face a mask of confusion, his own comfortable, normal world just having been shattered by her yes. He doesn't understand what just happened. But the truth is, she barely understands it herself. It is not a thought, it is a feeling. It is a physical, tectonic shift in the very ground of her being. Her mind, which just minutes ago was a cold, dead, empty void, is now not. It is not happy. It is not hopeful. Those are cheap, small words. It is online. It is a workshop that has just had its power restored. The blueprints are suddenly, shockingly clear. The realization from that phone call is solidifying, from a flash of insight into a physical fact. It was never about her. It was never about her. It was about the need. It was about the child. It was about the mother's voice, the desperation in it, the simple human request for help. That is real. Her own circular, internal agony over her worth. That was the illusion. That was the dream. This is the waking world. We must understand what a radical revolutionary shift this is. For her entire life, Amelia's existence has been defined by reaction. She reacted to her family's script for her, their practical label. She reacted to her college failure. She reacted to her boss's demands at the diner. She reacted to her companion's indifference. Her life was a long, exhausting, defensive crouch, a series of movements designed simply to survive the next blow, the next demand, the next day. But this new plan, it is not a reaction. It is an action. It is the first truly intentional thing she has ever decided to do. It is, as the Taoist sages would say, her single step on a new path. She goes to her bedroom, walking past Owen as if he is not there. He is not a factor, he is not part of this new equation. She pulls out her old, battered laptop, the one that holds her shameful secret. She opens the folder, but the feeling is no longer shame, it is recognition. She opens a new document, and she begins to write. But she is not writing a business plan. She is not making spreadsheets or 5-year projections. She is not thinking about scaling or branding. Those are the words of the builders. She is doing something much more fundamental. She is, for the first time, formulating her purpose. She simply writes down what that mother, Sarah, needed. She writes down what the child Leo felt. The first line she types is, "Focus on patience, not on grades." The second, "The feeling is the problem, not the math." She remembers the park. Pirates, not fractions. Sticks and stones, not workbooks. Validate the frustration, then build the bridge. She is not inventing a curriculum. She is describing a connection. She is taking her gift, her stone, and she is at last drawing the blueprint for the house she will build with it. The energy is different. The diner drained her. It was a black hole for her life force. This planning, she has been at it for an hour and she is not tired. She is vibrating. There is an ancient, profound wisdom in the 127th Psalm. Unless the Lord builds the house, the laborers labor in vain. This is not a religious statement. It is a psychological law. The Lord, in this blueprint, is purpose. It is the why. Her work at the diner, her life with Owen, it was all labor in vain. It was building without a why. It was just stacking meaningless, exhausting blocks, a house with no foundation that collapsed every single night. But this new work, this plan, it has a why. The purpose is building the house. And so, the labor itself, the act of planning, is not draining. It is generative. It is feeding her. Now we must be clear. The old voice, the internal prosecutor, the one that called her a fraud, is not gone. It is still there. It is whispering in the back of her mind, "You're still just a waitress. You have no degree. This is one phone call. It's a fluke." The fear is not gone, the doubt is not gone, but something fundamental has changed. She finally has an answer for it. The voice screams, "You are a fraud!" And her new self, the builder, does not argue. It simply replies, "It doesn't matter, this child needs help tomorrow, I'm busy." She is for the first time stepping out of the smallest prison, the prison of the self. She is shifting painfully and slowly from the ego's question, "Am I good enough?" to the soul's question, "What is needed?" This is the heart of the new path. It is a noble, beautiful, and deeply resonant idea, safe in the glow of her laptop screen. But a blueprint is not a house. A plan is not a reality. It is an idea. And this idea, born in the quiet of 3 a.m., must now survive its first terrifying test. She has to actually go to that house tomorrow. She has to walk in, face that child, and do the work. Will this fragile, newborn purpose survive its first brutal contact with the real, unpredictable, and messy world? She stands outside the apartment door. It is a different kind of door. It does not smell like the diner of old Greece. It smells faintly of cinnamon. It smells like a home. She raises her hand to knock, and the motion, the simple act of lifting her arm, is enough to trigger the ambush. The voice, the cold, clear, supremely rational voice that she has known her entire life. It slams into her with the force of an interrogation. Who do you think you are? It is not a whisper. It is a prosecutor laying out the final, unassailable facts of her case. You are a fraud. You are standing here, right now, about to steal money from this desperate woman. You are a waitress. You are a college dropout. You have no degree, you have no authority, you have no right, you are an imposter. Her hand freezes, hovering an inch from the wood. It is trembling. She can see it, a visible physical manifestation of her lie. The voice is just getting started. What are you going to do when he asks a question you can't answer? What happens when this nice mother realizes you are a complete and total phony? You will be exposed. You will be humiliated. It will be worse than the phone not ringing. This is a catastrophe of your own making. Turn around. Run. Run. Right now before she opens that door. The logic is perfect. It is airtight. It is the story of her whole life, and it has, until this point, been 100% accurate. She stands there paralyzed, a war raging behind her eyes. The voice is screaming, "Run!" But then a new quiet and solid presence makes itself known. It is not a voice. It is a memory. It is Harrison's lesson. It is not about you. And then a new thought, her own thought, rises to meet the prosecutor. The voice is right. I am terrified. I might fail. I might be a fraud. Okay. She does something she has never done before. She agrees with the voice. Okay, I'm a fraud. But on the other side of this door is a small boy who thinks his brain is full of bees. I know how to help with that. The fear is real, but the need is realer. She is not fighting the voice. She is not trying to silence it. She is, for the first time, simply demoting it. It is no longer the general. It is just a loud, terrified passenger. And the why, the mother's voice on the phone, the boy's face in the park, is now driving. She takes a breath and she knocks. The sound of her knuckles on the wood is a gunshot, the start of a new race. The door swings open. The mother, Sarah, is a storm of nervous, grateful, and anxious energy. Amelia. Thank God. Please, come in. Come in. And there, hiding behind his mother's legs, is Leo, peeking out, his eyes wide and full of deep, profound suspicion. They are at the kitchen table. The scene is exactly as her fear predicted. The boy is sullen. He is vibrating with a silent, angry anxiety. The dreaded math workbook is on the table, an object of such palpable menace, it seems to be sucking the light out of the room. The voice in her head is back, its tone smug, satisfied. See, he knows you're a fake. You're losing him. He hates you. You're blowing it. You have 30 seconds until he starts to scream. Run. Amelia looks at the workbook. She looks at the boy's clenched, white-knuckled fists. She feels the familiar cold panic rising in her own throat. She is about to fail. But the new thought, the new driver, is still there. It is not about me. Her mission is not to be a teacher. Her mission is to help this child. She reaches out, not for the boy, but for the book. She puts her palm flat on the cover and with a slow, deliberate motion slides it to the far end of the table, until it is out of both of their immediate sight lines. She looks at Leo, who has watched this act with a kind of stunned disbelief. She leans in, conspiratorially. I hate that book, she whispers. The boy's eyes, which had been narrow and hostile, widen. Me too, he whispers back. It's the bees. She smiles. A real one. The bees are the worst. This is the moment. This is the application of the stone. There is a concept in Zen philosophy called shoshin, or beginner's mind. It is the act of shedding the burden of being an expert. The expert is rigid, closed, and terrified of being wrong. The beginner is open, fluid, and present. Amelia, by admitting she hates the book, has shed the identity of teacher. She is not pretending to be an authority. She has instead become an ally. She has dropped down to his level, not as a superior, but as a fellow human who also understands the terror of the bees. She is, in this moment, perfectly and purely a beginner. This is the true victory. It is not a triumph over the fear. It is a triumph of action in spite of it. The voice, the prosecutor, is still there. It is grumbling in the back of her mind, still insisting she is a fraud. But it is quieter. It has been drowned out. It has been muffled by the sound of work. She has hidden the word in her heart, as the 119th Psalm says. She has internalized Harrison's lesson, serve, and she is using it as a shield, not against the fear, but against the paralysis that the fear demands. This is imperfect action. It is the only kind of action that ever builds anything real. She has laid the first stone. The session is over. An hour has passed in what felt like 10 minutes. Amelia is packing her bag, her hands trembling slightly, the adrenaline of the performance draining away, leaving her feeling shaky and exposed. The internal prosecutor, the voice of her fraudulence, is clearing its throat, ready to begin its cross-examination, ready to tear apart every mistake she made, every moment she hesitated. It was a fluke. You got lucky. You're still a fraud, and you... But before the voice can gain traction, The door opens. Sarah, the mother, is standing there. She is not anxious. She is not critical. She is still. Her face is a mask of something Amelia has never seen directed at her. A kind of stunned, profound awe. I was listening, Sarah says, her voice quiet. From the hallway, I have to... What did you do? Amelia fumbles with her bag, the old waitress script rising up, the instinct to minimize. Oh, it was nothing. We just talked about pirates. Sarah cuts her off, shaking her head, a small disbelieving laugh escaping her. No, nothing. Amelia, I have spent 6 months fighting with him in that chair, 6 months of screaming, of tears, of him calling himself stupid. I have tried tutors, I have tried everything. She points toward the living room where Leo is, for the first time, quietly working on the next page, humming to himself. He's laughing, she whispers. He is laughing, over math, thank you. The words thank you land with a physical weight. They are not the distracted automatic thanks she gets for refilling a coffee. This is a gratitude so heavy, so real, it feels like an object. Sarah holds out the payment, and this money, this cash, is different. The $20 tip from the diner had felt like a mistake. This feels earned. This is not a tip. It is an exchange of value. Her gift, her stone, has just been proven to have a price. It has utility. As she takes the money, her hand is steady. The internal prosecutor, the one that was about to scream at her, is silent. It is a new kind of silence. Not the cold, dead, empty void from the night before. This is a full silence. It is the silence of a courtroom when the prosecutor, having just seen the final, irrefutable DNA evidence, has no further questions. The voice of her fraudulence has no argument. It cannot. It is a creature of subjective fear, and it has just been confronted with an objective, external fact. The fact is Leo humming. The fact is Sarah's gratitude. The voice cannot argue with this data. It is not defeated. It is simply suddenly irrelevant. And then Sarah delivers the line that changes everything. The line that proves it was not a fluke. It's just my sister, she says, her voice hesitant again. Her daughter she's in a different grade, but she is having the exact same problem, the same anxiety. Is it okay if I give her your number? I mean, I don't know if you're... Amelia looks at her. Yes, she says. The voice is clear. Yes, you can. The need is real. The path is real. This is the harvest. There is a profound ancient promise in the 126th Psalm. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. Amelia sowed in tears. She sowed in the terror of printing the flyers. She sowed in the agonizing shame of the great silence of the phone. She sowed in the humiliation of Owen's pity and Dave's offer. She sowed her last $20, her last shred of hope. And this is the first, shocking and undeniable sheaf of the harvest. It is not joy in the way we think of it. It is the solid, foundational and unshakable proof of her own utility. This is the great secret antidote to the internal critic. The philosopher Adam Smith, in his theory of moral sentiments, spoke of the impartial spectator. He argued that we cannot trust our own biased internal voice. It is too close, too critical. We must instead look to the feedback of an impartial spectator to judge our true worth. For her entire life, Amelia's spectators were not impartial. Her family and Owen were biased, invested in her stagnation. But Sarah was impartial. She did not care about Amelia's identity. She cared about her son's pain, and her genuine, external, objective feedback, "You helped him. Can you help my sister?" is the real evidence. It is the data that has finally, after a lifetime of argument, silenced the internal prosecutor. It did not happen all at once. It happened in the small, quiet, and terrifying accumulation of yes. That first yes to Sarah, the mother of Leo, led to a second phone call. "My sister gave me your number." That led to a yes. A week later, a mother at the playground, having heard the story, approached her. "Are you the pirate lady?" That led to a yes. She now has 4 students. 4 small, regular appointments, 4 islands of meaning in the vast grey ocean of her old life. She is still at the diner, but her shifts are a blur, a necessary soul-crushing chore she endures to get to the real work, the afternoons in quiet kitchens, surrounded by twigs and pebbles. She is in the middle of a lunch rush, the familiar acidic smell of old coffee in her nostrils, the clatter of plates a constant dull headache. Dave, her boss, pulls her aside, his face unusually serious. "Amelia, walk with me," he says, guiding her to the small, cramped office in the back. "Listen, you've seemed a little distracted lately, but you are, hands down, the best waitress I've ever had. You're reliable, you're smart. That new girl is a disaster." He leans against the desk. "So here's the deal. I'm making you assistant manager, full-time, salary, benefits. You'd be in charge of scheduling, inventory. It's a real future here, Amelia. It's security. This is it. This is the bread. This is the Inquisitor's offer. A real future, security. It is the physical, tangible, undeniable win that her entire family, her entire script has always told her was the only goal. Assistant manager. Benefits. She can hear her mother's voice brimming with pride. "See, I always said you were the practical one." She can feel Owen's relief, the release of his terror, the joy of normalcy returning. This is the reward for her long, dutiful suffering. It is the keys to the comfortable prison, now offered with a velvet pillow. This is the world's inheritance. This is safety. And as she stands there, processing the words, her mind racing, a buzzing vibration comes from the apron pocket, the cheap phone she bought just for her other life. She pulls it out, a text message from a new number. "Hi, are you Amelia? My friend Sarah, Leo's mom. She gave me your number. She said you work wonders. My daughter she's really struggling. Are you taking new clients?" She looks at the text. She looks at Dave. His face is smiling, expectant, waiting for her to accept the real future. And her whole life in this one single agonizing instant has just been split in two. There is an ancient, profound declaration in the 16th Psalm, "The Lord is the portion of my inheritance and my cup." This isn't just religious language. It is a radical psychological statement about choice. It is the act of declaring where your true inheritance comes from. We are all given an inheritance by our past, by our families. It is the script, the story, the practical path. It is the safe job, the sensible life. It is the job as assistant manager, the bread that Dostoevsky's Inquisitor offered. It is the path of security. But this text, this is the other inheritance, the one that rises up from the soul. The 19th century philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote about this. He described the knight of faith as a person who makes a choice that, to the rest of the world, looks like madness. It is the person who trusts their internal compass, their purpose, over the objective external reality of the safe, sensible path. This is the moment Amelia is in. The world, in the form of Dave, is offering her a promotion. Her soul, in the form of a desperate parent, is offering her a function. One is a title, the other is a calling, and she, standing in a cramped, windowless office, must now choose which one is real. She sees her whole life laid out in two clear, distinct directions. One is a long, grey, stable, predictable and well-lit hallway. It is assistant manager. It is benefits. It is normal. It is the life she is supposed to want. It is the life that will earn her the approval of everyone she has ever known. The other path, it is a dark, uncertain, unpaved woods. It is 4 students and a text message. It is not a salary. It is not benefits. It is not security. It is terrifying. It is unknown. It is everything. It is the only thing that has ever made her feel alive. We have all stood here. It is the 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood that the poet Robert Frost described. And the sorry I could not travel both is the agony of it. You must choose. You cannot be the practical assistant manager and the pirate lady who calms the bees. You must choose your inheritance. Will it be the one handed to you by the world, or the one that rises up from your own authentic and terrifying core? The voice of her fraudulence is screaming, "Take the job, you fool! It's stability, it's real!" But the memory of Leo's laugh, The memory of Sarah's tears of gratitude. It is, for the first time, louder. She looks at Dave, his smile waiting for the yes that will secure her practical future. She can feel the phone, silent now, in her apron, a heavy weight that is either an anchor or a key. "Dave," she says, her voice impossibly calm, "I am so grateful for this, I really am, but I can't accept, I'm sorry." He is stunned. "What? Why? Is it the money?" She shakes her head, unknotting the apron strings, the physical act of untying herself from the script. "No, I'm going to be teaching." She lays the apron, the old greasy costume of her former self, on the counter. She turns and walks out the door, away from the smell of coffee, away from benefits, away from normal. She has chosen. She has chosen the terrifying, uncertain and dark woods of meaning over the well-lit, stable and suffocating hallway of security. The decision is made, but what exactly is the cost of meaning, and what happens when the first bill comes due? The diner door closes behind her. The small bell above it gives a final cheerful tinkle, a sound that is so mundane, so familiar, it is utterly grotesque. It is the sound of her old life, the sound of her prison, politely saying goodbye. She is standing on the sidewalk. The street is loud with midday traffic. The air smells of exhaust and hot pavement. She has no job, she has no salary, she has no security. She has just, by all objective, practical standards, completely and totally destroyed her own life. She has just committed an act of financial and social insanity. She should be terrified. She should be in a full-blown, vomiting panic. But she is not. The feeling that is settling over her as she stands on that sidewalk is one she has never in her entire life experienced. It is calm. It is not joy. It is not euphoria. It is not victory. It is a deep, cold and profoundly solid quiet. The war is over. The civil war that has been raging inside her, the practical waitress versus the fraudulent teacher, has ended. The choice has been made, and the side that won was not the loudest or the most logical or the most secure. It was simply the one that was real. This is the peace that the philosopher Lao Tzu spoke of. It is the feeling of being in alignment with the Tao, with the way. For her entire life, Amelia has been swimming against the current. She has been fighting her own nature, trying to be the practical thing her family's script demanded. It was a constant, exhausting and violent struggle. But the moment she said no to Dave, the moment she laid down the apron, she stopped fighting. She let go. She turned, and she began to move with the current, the one that was always pulling her toward the pirate lady. The feeling is not easy. It is just correct. There is no more friction. This is the state described in the 131st Psalm. It is one of the most psychologically advanced concepts in ancient literature. The poet says, "My soul is like a weaned child." This is not the peace of a baby, which is the peace of ignorance and total dependence. This is the peace of a weaned child. It is the peace of a being that has learned it no longer needs the milk it once thought was its only source of survival. Amelia, in that office, was weaned. She realized in that final, terrible choice that she no longer needed the milk of Dave's approval, or her mother's pride, or Owen's permission. She could, at last, feed herself. This is authenticity. It is not a feeling. It is a state of being. It is the simple, quiet, and profound alignment of what is inside with what is outside. The being, "I'm a teacher," and the doing, "I just walked away from the diner to go teach," are, for the first time, in perfect, simple harmony. The internal prosecutor, the voice of her fraudulence, is still there. It is screaming in the back of her mind. "You are a fool. You are insane. You just threw away a salary. You will be homeless," but its voice is thin. It has no power, it is just noise because she is no longer arguing with it. She is just walking. She gets home. The apartment is quiet. Owen is on the sofa where she left him, but he is not on his phone. He is sitting in the dark, his hands on his knees, staring at the door. He was waiting. He knows. He saw her walk away from Dave. He saw her choose the text message. He saw her commit the act of insanity. He is the living embodiment of the old script, of security, of the practical world she has just rejected. He is the ghost of her past, and he is looking at her as if she is the ghost. You did it, didn't you? He whispers. His voice is not angry. It is hollow. It is the voice of a man who has just seen his entire, stable, predictable world, his normal, shatter into a million pieces. You threw it away. The job, the raise, for that. He gestures vaguely at the phone, at the world of her hobby. She looks at him, and she feels nothing. Not anger, not guilt, not even pity. Just distance. He is a person speaking a language she no longer understands. He is a builder from the old blueprint, and she is no longer in that building. She walks past him into the bedroom and pulls her laptop from its bag. She is at last bringing her secret hidden life out of the shadows. I have to get ready, she says, her voice calm. I have a new client. He just stares at her, at this stranger who has replaced his companion. Amelia, he says, his voice a low, warning hiss. What are you going to do? About us? About rent? She pauses at the bedroom door. She looks at him, truly, perhaps for the first time. She is not looking at a partner. She is looking at an anchor. I don't know, she says. And the calm, honest truth of that answer is the most terrifying and the most powerful she has ever felt. The decision is made. But the consequences, they are just beginning. That first yes was a pebble, but that pebble dropped into the still dead water of her life started a ripple. The first student, Leo, became 3. The mother, Sarah, told her sister. That sister told a friend at the playground. The 3 students became 10. The ripples were not a wave, not a flood. They were a slow, quiet, but undeniable current. And this current was now pulling her away from the old, dead shore of her former life. She dropped a shift at the diner, then another. The money was not good. It was terrifying, but it was possible. And the first terrifying choice to say no to her boss, it had made the next choice, and the next, inevitable. One afternoon, standing in her kitchen, she counted the small, crumpled pile of cash from her clients. It was almost enough. Almost. But not quite. The old voice, the one that screamed about security, was still there, a constant low-grade hum of terror. This is not a life. This is a game. The rent is due. But she looked at the apron, the greasy costume of her old self, hanging on the door, and she knew, with an absolute, final certainty, that she could not put it on again. Not even for one more shift. She took her small, meager savings, the last of the practical money, and she walked to the local community center. She did not rent a classroom. She rented a closet. A small, forgotten, windowless room in the basement, smelling of old paint and floor wax. She spent 3 days painting it. The work was brutal, physical, and exhausting. Her back ached, her hands were raw. She was alone, in a basement, breathing fumes, spending money she did not have. And she was, for the in her life, happy. We have a problem with that word, happiness. We have been trained by a world obsessed with comfort to confuse happiness with pleasure. We think it is the absence of pain. We think it is security, benefits, the life she was told to want. That is hedonia, the satisfaction of the senses. But the Greeks had a better word, eudaimonia. This is not pleasure, it is flourishing. It is the profound, soul-deep satisfaction that comes from living a life of virtue and purpose. It is the ache in the back from building a house that matters. This is what she felt. She painted the walls a calm, warm yellow. She brought in a rug she found at a thrift store. She spent $10 on cheap, soft lamps to kill the terrible, fluorescent hum of the overhead lights. She did not call it a tutoring center. She did not call it a business. She took a piece of wood, painted it, and hand-lettered the name on the door. The Discovery Room. This was work. The diner, she realized, was not work. It was labor. It was the endless, repetitive, meaningless labor in vain that the 127th Psalm warns against. It was stacking rocks for no purpose. It was, as she had felt, just a way to pass the time until death. This painting, this planning, this was building. It was the work of the house that the old poem described. The Lord, the purpose, was the architect. And because the purpose was clear, The labor itself was not in vain. It was, in its own way, sacred. The exhaustion was not a drain, it was a consequence. A good, clean, earned consequence. She was no longer a victim of her life. She was the architect of it. That secret, useless passion she had hidden in a folder, the one she had been so ashamed of. It was not a hobby, it was a function. It was the tool she was always meant to use. We see here the profound truth of Nietzsche's famous statement. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. The how of her life was, by all practical standards, a disaster. She was, technically, unemployed. She was poorer than she had ever been. She was living on cheap noodles and cheaper coffee. Her relationship with her companion, with Owen, was a cold, silent war, a matter of two ghosts sharing a lease until it could be broken. The how was brutal, but the why was so loud, so clear, and so powerful that it drowned out the how. The why was the look on a child's face when the bees in his head finally went quiet. The why was the text from a mother that just said, "He got a B. He's never gotten a B. Thank you." The old internal prosecutor, the voice of her fraudulence, was still there. It still whispered to her late at night that she was a fool, that she was broke, that she was setting herself up for a fall. But its voice had no power. It was just noise. The work was the shield. The purpose was the armor. She had finally, after a lifetime of laboring in vain, begun to build her house. She had found her purpose, but in a world that runs on cash, in a life that still has rent to pay, can purpose alone ever be enough? The discovery room is no longer a closet in the basement. It is a small, bright storefront office with a proper sign on the glass. The discovery room. Patience, not grades. The rent for this space is higher, and it is terrifyingly paid. It is paid for the next 3 months in advance. She is sitting on a small, child-sized chair, leaning over a table with a young boy, her newest client. They are not using twigs, but custom-made wooden blocks, and she is explaining percentages. She is calm, she is not performing, she is simply working. The room is full of the low, focused hum of two minds, locked in a single, productive and peaceful task. There is an ancient pastoral image in the 23rd Psalm. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. We have been trained to see this as a passive state, a gift of rest that we are just given. But it is not. It is an achievement. It is the destination you earn after you have consciously and painfully chosen to walk through the valley of the shadow, the valley of your own deepest, most paralyzing fears. Amelia walked through that valley. She faced the silence of the phone. She faced the terror of quitting her job. She faced the agony of the total, crushing unknown. And these still waters, they are the consequence of that journey. They are not an external place. They are a new, internal, and earned state of being. Her soul is at last restored. The old internal prosecutor, the voice that screamed fraud at her for her entire life, is not gone. It is still there. It is a bitter, old, resentful voice in a distant, locked room of her mind. But she just doesn't go into that room anymore. She has finally and completely lost interest in her own diagnosis. Her focus is no longer inward, on the constant, agonizing and circular analysis of her own worth. Her focus is outward. It is on the desk. It is on the wooden blocks. It is on the state of this child's understanding. She has, through the simple, repetitive and daily act of service, been weaned from the addictive, toxic milk of her own self-obsession. This is what success actually feels like. It is not the manic, heart-pounding euphoria of a lottery win. It is not the adrenalized, hollow and public win of the assistant manager promotion she was offered. It is not, by the world's standards, wealth. It is sufficiency. It is prosperity. It is the deep, quiet and profoundly solid calm that comes from paying her rent, her bills, her life, with her purpose. The money that comes in, the checks that she deposits, they are not money in the way the diner's wages were. Those were a reward for endurance. This is a clean, simple and direct consequence of generating real, tangible human value. She is, for the first time, living in a state of total, profound alignment. The thing she loved in secret, her passion for teaching, has been united with the thing she is uniquely good at, her gift for connection. This combination has met a deep, aching need in the world, the mothers and their children, and that world in return is paying her for it. This is the four-cornered foundation. It is the perfect, stable, human structure. It is what Plato meant by the good, a life lived in accordance with the truth of one's own specific and unique nature. She is at last herself. She is still tired at the end of the day. The work is hard. It is emotionally, mentally, and spiritually draining, but it is the good tired. The diner, she realizes, was a black hole. It was an energy vampire. It was a system of pure, soul-crushing depletion that took her life force and gave her just enough in return to show up the next day. This work is generative. It is a self-sustaining fire. The act of giving creates the energy to give more. She is no longer a ghost in an apron, a role she was forced to play. She is an architect standing in a small but very, very real house that she built herself. She has done it. The practical script her family wrote for her is a dim, irrelevant, and almost sad memory. The waitress is gone. The builder is here. She has solved the great professional and personal riddle of her life. She is whole. She is stable. She is purposeful. She closes the door to the discovery room for the night, the small bell on its door giving a quiet, satisfying chime, a sound that is all her own. She has, at last, built her own house. But now she must go home, to the man who is still haunting her old empty one. She walks back to the apartment, the quiet, solid hum of her own new world, the discovery room, still vibrating in her chest. It is a feeling of sufficiency. It is the deep, clean, somatic knowledge that she is, at last, standing on her own, earned, solid ground. The key turning in the lock of her apartment is no longer the sound of a prisoner returning to a cell. It is now the sound of a visitor, an architect, returning to a building that is scheduled for demolition. The contrast is immediate and brutal. Her new space, her real life, is warm, bright, and smells of fresh paint and new wood. This apartment, the one she still shares with her companion, is cold. It is dark, the blinds drawn in the late afternoon, and it smells of stale air and nothing. He is on the sofa, but he is not, as he once was, a ghost lost in a digital haze. He is waiting. The phone is on the cushion beside him, dark. The television is off. The silence in the room is not the old, familiar, empty silence of digital absence. It is a new, thick and loaded silence. It is the silence of an animal coiled, waiting for a confrontation. He has felt her absence. He has felt her, over the last few weeks, slipping away from him, becoming a person he no longer recognizes. Her success, her new, quiet, purposeful energy, has not inspired him. It has instead become a harsh, unflattering light, illuminating his own stagnation. And he hates that light. He does not look at her. He speaks to the opposite wall. "You were late," he says. It is not a question. It is an accusation. The room," she starts, her voice calm. "I had a new—" He cuts her off, standing up in a sudden, violent burst of contained energy. "The room," he spits the word as if it is poison. That's all you care about now, isn't it? That place. You're never here. And when you are," he gestures around the dark apartment, You're not here, you've left. You just haven't bothered to pack." He is right. And the simple, calm, factual truth of his accusation is what, in the end, sets her free. The synopsis is clear. The conversation finally happens. He accuses her of abandoning him for her new work, but as he stands there, his face a mask of resentment and betrayal, she feels not guilt. She feels clarity, a profound, sad, and absolutely final clarity. She looks at this man she once thought she needed, this man whose approval she once begged for, this man whose pitying laugh had once defined her, and she realizes, in this one, final, devastating instant, the last and most important truth. He was never a ghost. He was an anchor. A ghost is a passive, sad thing, haunting a space. An anchor is an active, heavy and intentional thing, designed for one single purpose, to hold a vessel in place, to stop it from moving, to keep it from sailing. All of it. The pity, the cute hobby remark, the "you're setting yourself up to fail." It was not concern, it was not practicality, it was gravity. It was the gravitational pull of a stagnant object, desperately, unconsciously, trying to keep her in the mud, because her moving was a terrifying indictment of his stillness. This is the moment of individuation, the term the psychologist Carl Jung used for the soul's most critical and most painful journey. It is the moment a person must, in order to become a whole, complete and individual self, separate. They must cut the lines, pull up the anchors, and untangle themselves from the expectations, scripts and relationships that were keeping them in the collective. In this case, the collective, miserable, stagnant us of their shared, empty apartment. There is a profound, triumphant line in the 18th Psalm. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. We are taught to read this as an external savior. But this is the real meaning. The spacious place is the discovery room. It is the life she built, the one that has room for her to be her full self. And the he that rescues her? It is not a god. It is not Harrison. It is her own new individuated self. She has at last found delight in her own stone, in her own gift, and that new non-negotiable self-worth. It is the force that is now finally rescuing her. She goes to the bedroom. She does not yell. She does not argue. The argument is over. It has been over for weeks. She pulls a duffel bag from the closet. He follows her, his voice rising, a raw, panicked and wounded sound. "What? What are you? You're leaving? Now? Just like that? After all this?" She looks at him, this stranger, this anchor, and she feels a deep, profound and heartbreaking sadness. But it is not her sadness. It is his. "I'm not abandoning you, Owen," she says, her voice impossibly quiet, her hands steadily packing a few shirts. "I am, finally, after a lifetime, just not abandoning myself." This is the final boundary. This is the act that her new earned and non-negotiable value demands. Her new life, the one she built, and her old life, the one he inhabits, cannot coexist. They are made of different materials. One is made of purpose, the other is made of pity. One is made of growth, the other is made of stagnation. And she, the architect, cannot, will not, live in the old, condemned building any longer. She zips the bag. She walks to the door. She leaves him there, in the center of the dark room, a man still anchored to a sofa, a man who has just, at last, truly become a ghost. She walks out of the apartment, and she does not look back. She has resolved the first chaos, the professional one. And now, with this one final, painful and necessary step, she has at last resolved the second. The scene is no longer the apartment. It is no longer the diner. The old dead world is gone. The new one is small, quiet, and smells of fresh paint and wood. This is the discovery room. The walls are the color of a calm, warm yellow. The light is soft, coming from lamps, not from the harsh, buzzing, fluorescent tubes of her old life. And Amelia is on the floor, on a rug, sitting cross-legged. She is not a waitress. She is not a fraud. She is simply at work. Opposite her is a new child, a small girl with eyes wide with that familiar old anxiety. The dreaded math workbook is nowhere to be seen. Between them is a pile of treasure, smooth pebbles, rough-barked twigs. She is, in this moment, a perfect mirror of the scene in the park. But she is no longer the accidental, terrified and ashamed actor. She is the mentor. She is explaining, in a low, calm and deeply focused voice, how the twigs are the captains and the pebbles are the crew. She is not performing. She is not trying. She is at last in a state of pure, effortless and authentic flow. She has, finally and completely, become the woman she was always meant to be. Her face, which was once a mask of brittle, practiced smiles or hollow, numb apathy, is calm. It is the face of a person who is, at last, standing on her own, solid and earned foundation. She is not a new person. This is the great secret. We are not reborn. We are unburied. She did not, in the end, have to change who she was. She just had to stop, at long last, lying about who she was. She had to stop agreeing with the builders who told her that her foundation was rubble. She had to stop listening to the scripts that told her she was practical or foolish or a fraud. Her purpose was not a new life she had to find. It was her oldest life, her most authentic life, the one she had been so brutally and successfully taught to be ashamed of. Her journey was not one of transformation, it was one of excavation. We have watched Amelia dig that stone out from under the rubble of a lifetime of bad evidence. We saw her identify it, clean it off, and in the end, build with it. This journey, it is not just her story. It is the story of purpose itself. It is the human story. If this path, this idea of rescuing your own true and useless gift from the expectations of the world resonates with you, then support this channel. Like and subscribe. It is the fuel that allows us to keep digging, to keep building these blueprints for a life that matters together. The camera stays on her face on this new earned and profound calm. She is the mentor she herself so desperately needed. She is, in the end, her own Harrison. She has become the source of her own quiet and unshakable wisdom. This is the destination. This is the end of the war. But the lesson is universal. It is the great, central truth of that ancient line from the 118th Psalm. The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is not, as we've learned, a story about construction. It is a blueprint for a human soul. It is the story of value. We all have a rejected stone, every single one of us. We all have a part of our true authentic selves, a useless passion, a silly interest, a cute hobby, a gift that our builders told us was worthless. Our builders were our families, our culture, our bosses, our education, and the loudest, most vicious, and most practical builder of all, our own internal critic. We were taught to be ashamed of this gift. We were taught to bury it, to hide it in a secret folder, to snap the laptop shut when someone walked in, to call it a hobby so the world wouldn't see how much we truly, deeply loved it. We were taught that this stone was proof of our fraudulence, our immaturity, our impracticality. But the story of Amelia, the story of Ikigai, the story of purpose, is the revelation of the one great, liberating truth, that rejected stone is not your shame. It is not your hobby. It is not your weakness. It is your foundation. It is the only thing you have that is real. It is the only thing you can build a life on that will not collapse. It is the one true and non-negotiable source of your value. The journey is therefore one of rescue. It is the act of going back, of excavating that useless part of yourself and placing it with courage and terror at the very center of your new life. The great, final philosophical question is not if you have one. You do. The question is, what is it? What is that one useless part of you that you have been told to hide? And, as Harrison taught us, the most important question of all, who, in this world, is desperately in need of that specific and useless gift? What is your rejected stone? And what part of Amelia's long, hard, and painful fight to rescue hers, what part of her story, did you see yourself in the